Welcome to another installment of Seasonal Rot Showcase, the show that is the culmination of all of my horrible life choices. Well, here we are, 1,000 subscribers. By some god-given miracle, I managed to convince more than 1,000 of you guys on this big blue earth of ours that my inane ramblings about cartoons were worth watching. But at what cost? For those of you who've kept up with this channel over the years, you'll know that me throwing shade at the final season of Star vs. the Force of Evil has been something of a running gag, to the point where it's basically my chibi robo ziplash. You'll also know that, last year, on a complete whim, I made a promise that I'd cover it if I reached 1,000 subs. Now I said this under the assumption that I wouldn't hit that number for a long while, if at all. And now here I am, facing the consequences for my actions. Dear God, I don't want to do this. I'm pretty sure that most of us are familiar with Star vs. by now, but for those of you who aren't, Star vs. the Force of Evil is a Disney animated series that ran from 2015 to 2019 about Star Butterfly, a magical princess from another dimension, who, as part of an exchange program, comes to Earth, where she quickly befriends Marco Diaz. The two of them go on all sorts of zany, dimension-hopping adventures, while defending Star's wand from being taken from the evil but inept Pluto and his minions. Upon its premiere, Star vs. was a huge hit, immediately gaining a massive fanbase that was drawn in by its fun characters, weird creative stories, and offbeat tone. However, Star's status as a zany, silly send-up to the magical girl genre wouldn't last. In what has since become a cliche in modern cartoons, this initially goofy show would become more serious in its second season, incorporating a more serialized narrative, greater world building, and much more drama. Most notably though, this would be the point where the show really started to push the idea of Star and Marco having feelings for each other, with there being a developing love triangle between the two, and Marco's initial love interest, Jackie. Now, the fanbase was absolutely for this shift in direction, with Season 2 catapulting Star vs. Force of Evil's popularity to far greater heights. It went from a pretty well-liked cartoon to being widely regarded as one of the greatest cartoons of the 2010s. However, as we all know, the love for Star vs. wouldn't last. Following the multi-part Season 3 opener, Battle for Muni, the show would see another, even bigger shift in direction. Star's home of Muni replaced Earth as the main setting, several notable supporting characters got abruptly written out, and most infamously of all, there was a far greater focus on shipping drama. Admittedly, this change made perfect sense on paper. The lore, drama, and romance subplot were very easily the most discussed elements of Season 2, with the lighthearted slice-of-life episodes getting much less attention from the fanbase. However, this would end up being an extremely divisive move, with Season 3 alienating a large chunk of the fanbase who were drawn into Star vs. for the fun, zany tone, which this season would downplay in favor of drama. That's not even getting into the quality of the writing, which also left fans extremely split. Despite how polarizing Season 3 was though, Star vs. the Force of Evil still maintained a largely positive reputation online, and more than enough people were interested in seeing how the story would end, leading us into Season 4, which... just look at the title of the video. As for my personal feelings on the show, while it was airing, I absolutely loved Seasons 1 and 2, and generally enjoyed Season 3. Like many, while I enjoyed the humor and fun tone, at the time, I was more invested in the show's story, characters, and lore, to the point where I was fully down with the show going all in on drama and serialization, until Season 4 f***ed everything up. However, when I revisited Star vs. for this video, I sadly left having a lot less love for the show than I did before. As is the case with most fans today, I think that Season 1 still holds up great. The comedy's strong, the animation's great, the stories are fun, and Star and Marco's dynamic is at its absolute best here. Unfortunately though, things would go downhill from there. Season 2, despite it initially being my favorite season, doesn't hold up nearly as well upon rewatch, which, again, seems to be the general consensus among Star vs. fans nowadays. Now that isn't to say that Season 2 is bad by any means, there's plenty of stuff here that I really enjoyed. I loved the direction they took with Ludo here, having him go from an occasionally amusing, but largely unremarkable joke bad guy, to a genuinely captivating villain who's equal parts entertaining and threatening. I also like that they replaced Marco's dip friends with Jana, a character that people actually liked, and the far better choice for Star's main love interest. You know I'm right. Season 2 also perfectly balances the lore and drama with the lighthearted, silly, episodic adventures that drew people in to begin with. Despite the shift in tone, at this point in the series, Starverse still maintained its core identity. However, there's still quite a bit that prevented me from enjoying Season 2 as much as I did Season 1. First off, due to a change in animation studios, the animation is quite a bit stiffer than it was in Season 1, with it now being much less expressive and energetic, leading the comedy to not be as strong. There's also the Starco drama. While not being nearly as insufferable as it would become in later seasons, just isn't all that interesting. Also, I just found myself vibing more with Season 1's zanier, more off-the-wall tone, although this might be due to me now knowing that the darker, more dramatic tone of Season 2 would set up Star vs. the Force of Evil's eventual downfall. While I'd still call this an all-round good, solid 7 out of 10 season of television, I just don't like Season 2 nearly as much as I used to. Which leads us into Season 3, the point where the show's issues started to become really apparent. This season is the absolute definition of a mixed bag. While the Eclipse stuff is really interesting, and it got off to a strong start with the Battle for Muni special, Season 3 as a whole is really unfocused and weirdly paced, with things often taking a back seat to the Starco drama, which gets significantly more focus and becomes way more angsty and overbearing. While Season 3's story and pacing improves quite a bit following Monster Bash, with it ultimately ending on a high note, it doesn't change how much of a slog the show is between Battle for Muni and the mid-season finale. Also, even though I like the final few episodes of the season, there's so much stuff here that just kind of happens for no rhyme or reason. Like, Eclipse uses magic to stop Moon from killing Meteora, and that does something to Moon. What exactly? I don't know, but it leads her to go to the realm of magic. Why? Again, I don't know. Also, the Realm of Magic is able to heal the scars from using the spell with no name, but the dark magic is still there for some reason, which won't be addressed until the multi-part series finale. What even is dark magic in this setting? How does it work? Where does it come from if it apparently isn't native to the realm that's the source of all magic? I don't fucking know. Also, Eclipse turns Meteor into a baby in the end, which is I guess a thing she could do with a spell called Black Velvet Inferno? Why would you call a spell that turns people into babies Black Velvet Inferno? Are you really that edgy, Eclipse? And why doesn't Eclipse ever use this spell again? I feel like it would have been pretty useful in the final few episodes. I'm sorry, that was a bit of a tangent. That just really bothered me. This is also the point where the show really pushes Ponyhead, aka Actual Satan, into the spotlight, because we apparently needed entire episodes focusing on this floating sentient piece of garbage. However, probably the biggest issue with this season, aside from the awful romance junk, is that the show becomes a lot less fun. The tonal balance that made Season 2 mostly work just isn't there, with the drama, prejudice storyline, and angsty team romance overtaking the upbeat, fun elements that got people into Star Versus in the first place. Again, Season 3 isn't straight up bad, but it's really shaky, and you can just feel the show starting to lose sight of itself. Many fans blame this shift in tone and quality on Giancarlo Volpe, a writer, director, and storyboarder on Star Versus, who's often credited for the high quality of Season 2, leaving the show to work on The Dragon Prince, with the staff struggling to fill the gap that his absence left. With that in mind, it's kind of understandable why Season 3 is so weird and uneven. When one of the key figures behind the success of what's viewed as your show's best season leaves, there's gonna be some growing pains when you try and continue the story without them. It actually reminds me of what happened with Adventure Time, when the show started to lose sight of its identity, following Pendleton Ward stepping down as showrunner. However, while Adventure Time would manage to find its footing again following its divisive 6th season, win back a number of its fans, and ultimately maintain its reputation as one of the most loved cartoons of all time, Season 4 of Star Versus was a complete fucking disaster. Oh my god, what happened here? How did we go from a deeply flawed but perfectly competent season of television to the embodiment of all things unholy and wicked? Star vs. Season 4 is the reason why I can never be happy again. Every day I wake up screaming because I continue to live in a world where Season 4 of Star vs. the Force of Evil exists. This season my crops, burned my wife, and made my dog cry. I hate Season 4 with a burning passion. At the same time though, Season 4 of Star Vs. fails in so many unique, bizarre ways that it's genuinely fascinating to pick apart. I can't think of another piece of television that has left me so thoroughly baffled. What could have possibly happened behind the scenes to cause Season 4 to turn out like this? It's that special kind of bad that just gets stranger and stranger the more I think back on it. The 15-minute video I made during my Jank Mike era just doesn't do justice to how uniquely awful this season is. There is so much more nonsense going on this season than I originally thought. However, before I get into how this children's show hurt me personally, I think that it's only fair that I start by talking about the positives. Yes, as much as it pains me to admit it, despite being the source of everything wrong with the world today, Star vs. Season 4 isn't completely devoid of merit. Don't worry though, this won't take long. First off, I actually like Eclipse's storyline here. Eclipse is a really cool, engaging character, and I was genuinely invested in her struggle to be accepted by the bigoted pieces of crap that populate Uni, as well as her longing to be reunited with her husband Globgor. There were a number of aggressively mediocre, bland episodes that were elevated simply by Eclipse showing up and just being ridiculously likable and charismatic. Admittedly, her storyline's conclusion, while sweet, felt kind of unearned and a bit too easy, and I would have liked to get more insight into her past, namely her relationship with Solaria, her genocidal bigot of a mother. I am genuinely shocked that we didn't get something like a 22-minute episode focusing on her past. Despite this, Eclipse is still an absolute show stealer, and is my second favorite character in Star Vs. My first favorite being the absolute GOAT, Ludo, who is so powerful that he managed to make it out of Season 4 with his character completely intact. While it sucks that Ludo doesn't play a part in Season 4's plot, and only really appears in his focus episode, said focus episode is easily the high point of the season, and a strong, heartwarming conclusion to his character arc. I swear, Ludo is like the one thing about Star Vs. That is actually perfect. Top 10 Disney TVA villain right there. I also think that this season actually does more interesting stuff, with Star Marco's rebounds, I mean former love interests, Tom and Kelly. While I have issues with Tom's storyline that I'll get into later, this is still him at his most likable and engaging, with him getting more to do this time around than just being Star's boy toy. Kelly, meanwhile, has more of a personality here than in previous seasons, where she didn't have much going on beyond a cute design. Season 4 made her into a bit of a hothead who loved violence, and this personality played off of Marco's pretty well, which has the side effect of making her lack of screen time and the absolute crumbing way this show treats her all the more painful. And that's about it. Everything else about Season 4 is complete garbage that I desperately wish I could forget. This time around, rather than the typical 3, I'll be dividing my thoughts on this season into 5 major problems. Yeah, if the runtime didn't give it away already, it's gonna be that kind of video. So, without further ado, after all the build-up, it's finally time for me to tear into Season 4 of Star vs. the Force of Evil, one of the most aggravating, miserable seasons of television that I've ever forced myself to suffer through. Pray for me, folks. Problem number 1. Romance is dead and Starco killed it. Alright, let's just get straight into it. Without doubt, the most infamous aspect of Star vs. the Force of Evil is the show's gradual fixation on romance and shipping, specifically the will they or won't they storyline with Star and Marco. Now, I've covered my fair share of obnoxious, needlessly dragged out romance storylines on this channel, but Starco is just a special kind of awful. What started out as a genuinely sweet friendship became this needlessly angsty, drawn out, melodramatic storyline that did nothing but bring out the worst in these two. Now, Starco isn't simply a case where this romance story was fine up until Season 4 ruined it. More than anything, Season 4 is the culmination of the mounting problems with the way this show handled Star and Marco's relationship. If we want to fully understand how Starco would gradually go from the fandom's OTP to one of the most infamous couples in recent fandom history, we're going to have to go over and break down the progression of their relationship season by season, as well as cover the other players that got dragged into their nonsense. And by the end of it all, I think you'll understand why exactly I've grown to despise this pairing so much. Initially, fans of the show absolutely adored Star and Marco's relationship. The two of them made for a really fun duo, with Star being the upbeat, naive fish out of water, to Marco's self-conscious, awkward straight man. They had a really sweet, earnest friendship that also lent itself well to some great comedy. The key word here being friendship. You see, despite how infamous the shipping in Star Vs. would become, in Season 1, there were very few hints that Star and Marco viewed each other in a romantic light, with with the only real indicator that there might be something more there being in the fan favorite episode Blood Moon Ball, which we will talk about later because oh boy, will this episode have devastating consequences on Starco. Despite this though, as you'd imagine, between them being the main girl and the main guy of the show, as well as their great chemistry, a ton of fans immediately took to shipping them. However, while the ship was never outright disliked in the show's early days, there were also more than a few people who loved Star and Mocha's relationship because it seemed platonic, and this kind of close friendship between the main guy and main girl of a show was, and still is, kind of rare to see in media, especially in kids' cartoons, and that kind of dynamic meant a lot to some people. Now this might have played a role in how I view the ship today, but honestly, in the show's early days, I was never really all that into Starco as a romantic pairing. I mean, it wasn't like I vehemently despised the idea of them being a couple at the time. I just didn't view Star and Mocha's relationship in that kind of light. While I still do love how they play off of each other in season 1, I always thought that the way they were written here made them feel more like brother and sister than love interests. At the time, it was really difficult for me to imagine Star and Marco being anything other than best friends, and for reasons that will become very apparent later on, I think the show would have been much better off if it stayed that way. Season 1 also introduces two characters that will go on to majorly influence the romance storyline. Tom Lucidor, Star's ex-boyfriend, who at this point in the story is a temperamental bag of dicks and is extremely jealous of her friendship with Marco, and Jackie Lynn Thomas, a cool scared girl who Marco's crushing on. Oh, and I guess there's also Oscar, Star's crush, who doesn't matter in the slightest really. The show never treats Star's feelings for him with any degree of seriousness, and let's be real, half of you completely forgot that this character existed up until now. Now apart from the Blood Moon Ball, which again, I'll get to soon enough, there's not much to say about Star and Marco's relationship or any of the show's romances in season 1. Tom is a one-off character this season, I've already forgotten about the guy that Star was into, and Jackie is just sort of there for Marco to crush on, although they do some kind of interesting stuff later on in the season, where Marco slowly works out the confidence to really talk to her. More importantly though, Star and Marco are just besties who happen to allegedly be of the opposite gender. Cherish the simplicity while you still can. Season 2 is when the shipping and Starverses start to become a major focus of the series. At this point, it's very clear that Star has feelings for Marco, with the Season 2 premiere all but stating as much. However, this is also the season that sees Marco and Jackie's relationship really grow, with Jackie having a greater role this season, and gradually reciprocating Marco's feelings for her, culminating in them becoming an official couple by the mid-season finale, a development that Star isn't the happiest about. Now like I said before, the shipping drama was one of the most talked about, well-received aspects of season 2, and truth be told, at the time, I was actually really invested in the romance storyline. Not only was this one of the rare love triangles that didn't make everyone involved awful or insufferable for the sake of conflict, again, enjoy the peace while you still can, but the stuff with Marco and Jackie was actually really sweet, to the point where, despite Star's feelings for Marco being painfully apparent at this point, I was genuinely uncertain as to whether or not Jarco was actually the show's endgame, which made me really interested in seeing where this was all heading. Upon rewatch though, the Starco stuff this season just doesn't hold up. Looking back on it, I think I was really hoping that this storyline would end with Marco and Jackie being the endgame couple, and Star and Marco's relationship remaining strictly platonic. Like, think about how few stories there are that center on a close friendship between a guy and a girl, where one of them develops feelings for the other, only for them to not reciprocate those feelings, but the two manage to work things out and still remain best friends. The fact that a show like Starverses was dangling the possibility of this subversion of the typical romance tropes you see in kids shows was honestly the thing that really got me invested in this show's romance storyline. However, when you watch the Starco storyline this season, with the knowledge that they're going to get together in the end, it goes from feeling captivating to being a really boring, generic will they or won't they plot that I've seen countless times. Now stop me if you've heard this one before. The main girl is pining for her guy best friend, but uh-oh, she realizes her feelings for him too late, and now he's with another girl. This is despite the fact that the main guy's apparently in love with the main girl, and always has been, despite there being no real signs of it. And of course, this makes our heroine more than a bit jealous. Which leads into something that kind of bothers me about the romance storyline. The way they handle Star's jealousy. Now there's absolutely nothing wrong with having a teenager feeling jealous over the guy she likes dating someone else. However, in the mid-season finale, this jealousy would lead Star to use the All-Seeing Eye spell to not just spy on Marco and Jackie during their date, which is already a kind of messed up thing to do, but subconsciously use her magic, which is implied to be acting up because of said jealousy, to hurt them by derailing the skateboard they're riding. Now you'd think this would have some sort of consequences on the plot, like forcing Star to manage or overcome her jealousy, lest she ends up hurting anyone else, but no. Throughout Marco and Jackie's relationship, Star never really works to overcome these negative feelings, at least not in a healthy way, and while she feels bad about accidentally hurting Marco and Jackie, the narrative never really calls her out for spying on them. I mean, at the very least, Star had to have realized that spying on her friends is wrong, right? Initially, I was under the assumption that using the All-Seeing Eye for personal gain was going to be a one-and-done thing. Except, in the next season, specifically the episode Holiday Special, while not much attention is brought to it, it's all but stated that Star would continue to use the All-Seeing Eye to spy on Marco and Jackie. So basically, Star learned nothing from all of this.
We hope you've enjoyed No Moral Theater.
I want to make it clear that there's nothing wrong with having the main hero of a kid's cartoon do something wrong or irresponsible, but unless it's meant as a throwaway joke, or the characters doing this are very clearly not meant to be role models of any sort, when the heroine of a serialized kids show that takes its narrative seriously spies on their best friend while they're on a date and accidentally hurts them in a moment that isn't played at all for laughs, I expect them to eventually take some sort of responsibility and learn from their mistakes, or at the very least have the narrative call them out on it, neither of which occurs here. Now I wouldn't be so pissy about this if this were just a one and done thing, but this will unfortunately be the start of a very troubling trend of Star and later Marco doing shitty things and just kind of getting away with it without learning a damn thing. With these actions almost always being fueled by Star and Marco grappling with their feelings for each other in the worst way possible and dragging other people into their nonsense, but we'll get there when we get there. Anyways, Star continues to be jealous, as emphasized when the boy band she, Marco, and Jackie go to see perform a comically on-the-nose song about how much it sucks that she and Marco will seemingly be just friends.
We will be just friends, and now we'll be just friends.
Then in the penultimate episode of the season, we get another on-the-nose, albeit really fire song, where the royal songstrel sings about how Star's super in love with Marco. This all culminates in Star spending the season finale all angsty and sad and trying to avoid Marco, while her mom and the Magic High Commission are off doing something actually interesting and advancing the plot. And the season ends on a cliffhanger where Star admits to Marco that she has a crush on him in front of everyone, including his girlfriend, which is kind of a dick move, and I don't like it. My god, what were any of us thinking with Starco? Everything about the relationship is so lame now. Jana was right there, Star. What are you doing? This storyline would have been so much better if it all ended with Yuri. These characters are too not cishet to be a part of such a lame love story. Anyways, despite how iffy the whole thing with the All-Seeing Eye is, when viewed in a vacuum, I'd describe the romance in Season 2 as largely inoffensive. It's just a kind of lame, very typical will they or won't they story that doesn't have much of anything interesting to offer. At least that's what I would have said if it weren't for Marco and Jackie, the first official couple within the Starco love triangle, and if I'm being honest, my favorite canon pairing in the entire show. In contrast to Starco, which is significantly weaker in this season than I remembered, Marco and Jackie's relationship actually holds up really well. Despite now knowing that this was all going to end in heartbreak, I still found myself invested and endeared by their romance. The way that Marco and Jackie's relationship progresses feels natural and well-paced, much more so than any other pairing in Star Versus, and the two of them have such a cute dynamic, with Marco being this extremely awkward, self-conscious dork who doesn't think he's good enough for Jackie, while Jackie's just this really chill, nice girl who likes Marco just the way he is, and as Marco gets to know her better, we get to see that beneath her cool, infallible exterior, Jackie is also kind of a dork herself. Seriously, why was anyone ever mad at this pairing? Just look at them! How can you watch this and not think that these two are absolutely adorable together? The two of them just give off serious Max and Roxanne vibes, and I am entirely here for it. Now, with all that said, despite how distracting and kind of lame the Starco stuff is in Season 2, the second season does a good job of balancing the romance with the comedic lighthearted elements of the show. It isn't really until the final few episodes where the romance starts to overtake the plot, and even then, there's still interesting stuff happening outside of it. Unfortunately, this will be the final season where the romance in Star vs. the Force of Evil will be bearable in literally any way, with Season 3 being the point where it goes from an occasional annoyance to damn near the main focus of the show, and way angstier. Following Battle for Muni, because Moon decides that it's for the better that Stars stay in her dimension, Star and Marco have this heartfelt goodbye and act like they'll never see each other again, even though they each have magical pairs of scissors that lets them visit each other literally whenever they want, but whatever. Because of this, as well as Marco seemingly not reciprocating her feelings for him, Star tries to move past them, which later leads to her getting back together with Tom. You see, in Tom's couple of appearances in Season 2, despite still being kind of a dick, he gradually starts to realize that he has to stop pursuing Star and start working on himself as a person, even squashing his beef with Marco and developing a close, strictly platonic friendship completely devoid of gay subtext because there is a completely heterosexual, cisgender explanation for whatever the fuck these two had going on.
I feel like I should be dating someone who I could be best friends with.
Whoa, 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 whoa! I'm not leaving you! You're my best friend.
In spite of this, Star, quite understandably, still doesn't want anything to do with him. This all changes with Club Snub, where a misunderstanding between them at the annual Silver Bell Ball leads to them dancing with each other and starting to rekindle their bond. Granted, considering their history, they still have a bit of a ways to go before they can truly become close again, and oh, look at that, they're a couple again. At the end of Tom's very next episode, no less. Wild how they were able to patch things up so abruptly. Almost like the show wanted to start a new, even angstier love triangle as soon as possible. So you know how much I like Jarco? How Marco and Jackie becoming official felt organic and fully earned? How the two of them had such great chemistry that it generally felt like they could be the show's endgame couple? Well, apparently Butch Hartman was on the writing staff this season because the show went and did the opposite for Tom's Star. Look, I know that this pairing has its fans, but my god, I do not like these two as a couple at all. The way that they get together feels beyond forced. Like, yeah, Tom is still putting in the effort to improve as a person, but again, considering their history and the dick moves he's pulled in the past, Star having feelings for Tom again this soon doesn't feel believable. You know, unless Star isn't nearly as interested in being in a relationship with Tom as she claims. Yeah, Star's just using Tom. She's using Tom as her rebound guy so she can feel better about how things ended up with Marco. Now it's possible that Star didn't intend on using Tom, and she very well might have initially believed that she was sincerely into him, but it quickly becomes painfully clear that Star just isn't invested in this relationship. She's consistently more interested in being around Marco, and it's a constant source of insecurity for Tom. Now this wouldn't be so bad if the show deliberately wrote Tom Star to be a bad match, and have this storyline be about them both coming to terms with the reality that Star's heart isn't in this relationship, and Tom's just a rebound guy. But it really seems like Star Vs. wanted us to genuinely believe that there were any sort of sincere feelings on Star's end. That there was even a snowball's chance in hell that Tom Star could be endgame, despite it being painfully obvious at this point in the show that Starco was going to be the endgame couple. And maybe I'd be more forgiving of all of this if they did literally anything interesting or even remotely fun with this pairing. Most of Star and Tom's relationship is Star leading Tom on when it's painfully obvious that she likes Marco, Tom being a sad boy over it, and that's about it. Even the moments where they're just hanging out and enjoying each other's company fall flat for me. I'm genuinely sorry to all the Tom Star fans, but I don't think that Star and Tom have any chemistry with each other. Maybe it's because it was painfully obvious where this romance storyline was heading at this point, but even back before I knew just how bad things would get between Star and Tom, none of the cute moments between them managed to make me feel a single thing in my cold, dead heart. This is a tedious, miserable relationship that exists solely to serve as a roadblock between Star and Marco getting together, because we just gotta milk that drama for all it's worth. And as if to prove my point, Marco and Jackie break up literally the episode after Star and Tom get together. Wow. That is some seriously ridiculous timing. Following the weeks he spent on Muni, being a hero during the Battle for Muni special, Marco has been having a difficult time readjusting to life on Earth and finds himself yearning to go back to Muni. Jackie notices this and decides that it's better if she breaks up with Marco and lets him go have adventures in Muni. Now I'm pretty sure that the intent here was to portray Marco as becoming disconnected from Jackie like he has from Earth, but they don't do a good job of communicating that. Like, you'd think that Jackie calling it quits with Marco was a result of him becoming more distant or disinterested in her, but the two of them have a really nice date where the both of them are clearly having a good time and enjoying each other's company. Yet despite this, as soon as Jackie sees Marco wearing the knight's cape he earned from Uni, she's all like, "No, your heart's not in this, we gotta break up." Also, we can't do a long distance thing like we apparently did off screen during Battle for Muni because you're totally in love with Star, trust me. I'm not entirely sure what led Jackie to come to that conclusion, but the show has to make Starco happen somehow. This is what I mean when I say that this pairing is the exact opposite of Tom Star. Marco and Jackie's relationship is too healthy, and the two of them have too strong of chemistry for me to believe that the former isn't 100% committed to the latter. I don't think I've ever seen a show actually fail at making a couple seem like their relationship is going to fall apart. Even ignoring how much I like Marco and Jackie as a pairing, everything about this breakup just feels off and weirdly abrupt. There are literally zero cracks in this relationship. Where is all of this coming from? Also, Jackie's completely written out of the show, save for a few brief appearances in season 4, because this show sees no use for her now that Tom's a new roadblock to Starco becoming canon. Because God forbid Jackie's given something to do that doesn't involve Marco in some way. Gee, I sure hope the literal exact same thing doesn't happen to another character next season. I don't care if Muni's the main setting now. If they can find a way to still force Jana into the show, then they could have done the same for Jackie. Dear Lord, did they do this girl dirty. So now Marco's single, Star seeing Tom, everything's super awkward now, and come Lava Lake Beach, Marco fully realizes his feelings for Star that he apparently always had. This realization comes, of course, after another character tells Marco point blank that he's in love with her. Because why show your characters come to that conclusion on their own when you can just speed up the process by having someone else tell them? This is followed up by an extremely on-the-nose sequence where Marco is upset and freaking out as he runs into several couples on the beach, all while an angsty song plays. Because in case you didn't realize, Marco is upset that the girl he likes is seeing someone else. So, as you'd expect, Marco works to deal with these overwhelming feelings of heartbreak and longing in a way that is constructive and oh no, of course he deals with this by almost immediately putting the moves on another girl. That girl being Kelly, one of Star's friends, and someone who Marco interacted with in like one other episode prior to this point. I'm just gonna be blunt here. I think the way that Marco treats Kelly is really gross. While it's completely feasible that Star didn't deliberately go into a relationship with Tom with the intent of using him as a rebound, Marco knows exactly what he's doing here. Marco knows at this point that he's in love with Star, yet he still chooses to start pursuing Kelly. Like, the way he immediately puts his arm around Kelly following his little sad boy montage feels almost manipulative on his part. Now, I wouldn't have a problem with this if the point was that Marco was wrong for basically leading this poor girl on when he's clearly in love with someone else. But as we'll see in season 4, Star vs. doesn't seem to realize just how messed up all of this is. But we'll get there in a bit. As for how Marco and Kelly's relationship is portrayed this season, beyond this episode, there really isn't anything to say about them. The relationship here doesn't really amount to anything, beyond Kelly occasionally showing up to kind of get ship-teased with Marco, and it won't be until season 4 that they become a couple. The final season of this show, where Star and Marco are clearly the endgame. I'm sure this will be handled great. Star and Marco's increasingly aggravating, questionable behavior this season would finally come to a head in Booth Buddies, one of the most controversial episodes of the entire series, as this is the episode where Star and Marco have their first kiss. Well, she's still dating Tom, and under the manipulation of a creepy guy voiced by Alex Hirsch, who traps him in the photo booth because he really wanted to see these teenagers kiss. Also, they don't escape the booth using their magical scissors that lets them travel to different dimensions, because that would mean the episode would be over. As you can imagine, a lot of people weren't happy with this. Those who were getting sick of the Starco plotline were frustrated that the show once again did something to needlessly complicate an already angsty, miserable love triangle. Meanwhile, those who who were still on board the Starco train were upset that Star Vs made their OTP's first kiss, a monumental moment in any romantic pairing, occur under circumstances that made it into something ugly. But hey, at least this will finally be the end of Tom Star and this stupid love triangle. Right? Like, this has to be the catalyst for Star and Tom's inevitable breakup. They wouldn't keep on dragging this past early season 4, right? Right? So if it wasn't clear already, I found the romance storyline to be absolutely miserable in Season 3. Nearly every development here seems to solely exist to drag out Star and Marco's will they or won't they bullcrap, and it just makes the two of them really hard to like. And yet, somehow, it's only going to get worse from here. Now so far, I've been more or less breaking down the progression of the romance plotline in chronological order. However, because the romance arc is somehow even more complicated in Season 4 than it ever was before, I feel like it'd make the most sense to focus squarely on one aspect of the tangled web, that is Star and Marco's love life at a time, from least to most important. Let's start things off by digging into Marco x Kelly. Now admittedly, I actually kind of like Marco and Kelly's dynamic in Season 4. They gave Kelly more of a fun personality here, and when viewed in a vacuum, her dynamic with Marco is honestly kind of cute. However, it becomes a lot less cute when you remember that Marco is clearly still in love with Star. Regardless, at the end of Kelly's world, roughly a third into Season 4, Marco and Kelly become official. Now I know what the approximately 5 people watching this who are unfamiliar with Star vs. the Force of Evil are thinking. What stories are they gonna tell with Marco and Kelly as a couple? And the answer to that, dear hypothetical viewer, is none whatsoever. There's exactly one episode following this that shows Marco and Kelly being cute together, then the show abruptly has Marco dump Kelly. Off screen. Now having this couple that they've been building up for an entire season break up off screen might seem like a questionable decision, but at the very least, you'd think that Marco and Kelly breaking up would be important to the plot of the episode this was revealed in. Maybe give some time to explore Marco and Kelly's feelings on this? Nope. Marco offhandedly mentions their breakup to Tom, claiming that it was a completely mutual decision and that everything's cool between them, only to cut immediately to Kelly, who states that Marco straight up dumped her and appears to still be upset about it. That's it! And after it ends, Marco's relationship with Kelly will never be mentioned again. I have thoughts on this. This right here has to be one of the most baffling moments in the entirety of Star vs. the Force of Evil. It isn't just the fact that this pairing that they've been building up all throughout seasons 3 and 4 break up off screen. It isn't just that Marco broke this poor girl's heart after leading her on for so long. No, what really bothers me here is that Marco, and by extension the show itself, doesn't give a crap. Marco pursued Kelly solely as a means to get over Star, dumped her not long after they officially started dating without any remorse, and the show never calls him out on this. Marco's callousness, Kelly's feelings about this, it's all played off as a joke. This could have been an opportunity to give Marco some interesting character development by having him gradually realize that dating someone just so he can feel better about himself after the girl he actually loves starts seeing someone else is irresponsible and completely unfair to Kelly. They could have had him face consequences for this by having Kelly want nothing to do with him. It could have served as a wake-up call that he can't keep on running away from his feelings for Star and that he shouldn't be dragging other people into his bullcrap. But no. Instead, Marco basically manipulates this girl, breaks her heart, and faces no consequences or pushback from the characters or the narrative. All of this just makes me wonder why we even bothered with the Marco x Kelly ship. Nothing was accomplished here. Marco doesn't learn anything from this, Kelly's completely irrelevant from this point forward, and it doesn't even lead to any sort of conflict within the Starco storyline. Yes, doing something like having Star be jealous of Kelly would be lame, but it would have at least been something. Anything. Literally, the only thing that this entire bit of the romance subplot does is make Marco look like a creep. Seriously, why am I meant to sympathize with Marco on any level when at this point, Marco has gone from this anxious, level-headed, generally good-natured guy to this arrogant tool who doesn't seem to learn from his mistakes and is just cool with using Kelly for his own ends. In fact, the way the show treats Kelly in general just rubs me the wrong way. Despite being in the second opening, posing with all the other main characters, Kelly's primary role in this story is to be Marco's disposable black girlfriend. Nothing more, nothing less. While Tom at least has some stuff going on outside of being Star's love interest, Kelly is almost exclusively defined by her romantic relationships with the guys in her life, specifically Marco and her lame ex-boyfriend Todd. Yeah, she's friends with Star, but the two of them interact so little to the point where I couldn't really tell you much about their relationship. The only contribution that Kelly makes to this show that doesn't amount to either occasionally showing up just so Star can have another face in her friend group or getting ship teased with Marco is helping fight Meteora in the season 3 finale, which is kind of something, and showing up for like maybe a minute in one of the final few episodes to act as a jobber for a Solarian warrior. That's it. She's a complete satellite character whose sole purpose is to give Marco something to distract himself from his heartbreak. I'm sorry, but this is just such a lame way to treat quite literally the only prominent black character in the show. All in all, the Marco x Kelly subplot was a complete waste of time. It could have been removed from the show entirely, and quite literally, nothing would have been lost. Granted, it did give us Kelly's World, one of the few genuinely fun episodes of Season 4, but it could have very easily functioned without any of the shipping garbage. Next, it's time to cover an ongoing plot thread that's been around since Season 1, the Blood Moon Curse. See, in the episode Blood Moon Ball, Tom invites Star to the titular ball with the intent of putting them both under the curse of the Blood Moon, which will essentially force them to fall in love with each other. However, thanks to the warnings of this talking portrait that goes completely unexplained, Marco crashes the ball and attempts to rescue Star, only for the two of them to fall victim to the curse themselves. This, right here, was one of the biggest sources of speculation throughout the Star vs. fanbase. Both fans and detractors of the Starco ship were captivated by what this could mean for Star and Marco, and where it would take their relationship. And for the first 3 seasons, it was all but irrelevant to the story. Like, I say that it was an ongoing thread, but the Blood Moon doesn't get mentioned again until Season 4's The Blood Moon Curse. Prior to that episode, the Blood Moon would just briefly pop up in Bon Bon the Birthday Clown and Booth Buddies. Does it have any bearing on the plot in those instances? Maybe? I don't know. Prior to Season 4, it feels like the main reason the Blood Moon shows up is to tell the audience, don't worry, we haven't forgot about this plotline, it's gonna have a payoff eventually. And that payoff is definitely something. Come the Blood Moon Curse, Marco's feelings have apparently reached a boiling point, and he finally admits to Star and Tom that he's in love with the latter. I mean former. Again, totally heterosexual explanation here. Man, this storyline would have been so much better if it all ended with Yowie. In response, Tom reveals that the two of them are under the curse of the Blood Moon, and that's apparently the reason why they have feelings for each other, leading the three, alongside Jana, who's also there for some reason, to go and break it. Eventually, Star and Marco partake in a ritual that will apparently undo the curse. This requires them to relive their dance at the Blood Moon Ball. But just as the curse is about to be broken, Star says this.
What if it was never the Blood Moon?
But how? What? Based on what? No, seriously, what is the basis behind that statement? Before Star can elaborate, the ritual is complete, the two of them have no memory of reliving their dance, and the love triangle continues to be painfully dragged out. However, unlike Marco and Kelly's relationship, the Blood Moon isn't completely forgotten by the narrative, with it being brought up several times throughout the season. By the final few episodes though, the show seriously pushes the idea that it was actually never the Blood Moon, and that Star and Marco were in love for real the whole time, which begs the question, what exactly did the Blood Moon do then? Throughout the entire show, it's made apparent that the Blood Moon has been having some sort of effect on Star and Marco, but it's never really explained what exactly it's doing to them. Which is weird, because it leads to a lot of really troubling questions concerning Star and Marco's agency in all of this. Again, Season 4 tries to push this idea that Star and Marco were always in love with each other, even though the first time I personally felt that these two might be romantically interested in each other in any way was their dance in the Blood Moon Ball. You know, the thing that's supposed to force people to fall in love? It also begs the question, how much was the Blood Moon influencing their actions? Like Marco kissing Star in Booth Buddies, was that the Blood Moon's doing? Would Marco have done this without the Blood Moon curse? If so, based on what? If this was the Blood Moon, then this had to have been done in order to push Star and Marco closer together, which also makes me question if Star and Marco would have ever developed feelings for each other without the Blood Moon curse. I mean, yeah, they still have feelings for each other other after the curse is broken, but that doesn't change the fact that the Blood Moon could have potentially influenced their decisions from Blood Moon Ball onwards that led their relationship to become what it is now. Again, the show has basically told us from the start that the Blood Moon has been doing something to them. You can't go and walk that back in the final season without giving any sort of explanation as to what the f the Blood Moon actually did, because as is, it just puts into question if any of Star and Marco's decisions in regard to their love lives prior to breaking the curse were their own. Yeah, Tom and Star still broke up, but did the Blood Moon curse put their relationship on the path to failure? Would Star's relationship with Tom have been stronger by that point if the Blood Moon wasn't potentially drawing her closer to Marco? And if we just take the show at its word, and accept that none of the decisions Star and Marco made in their love lives were the result of the Blood Moon, then what was the point in any of this? What did having the Blood Moon curse here actually accomplish? All the Blood Moon really does for this story is artificially extend the Starco love triangle by having Star and Marco spend season 4 doubting that their feelings for each other were real. Even though at this point, the show has basically spelled out to everyone watching that Starco is the endgame couple, meaning that there's no tension or uncertainty on the audience's part as to where this storyline's going, which wouldn't be a problem if there was anything remotely interesting or engaging about this drag of a love story, and we're all just watching the show continue to waste our time with this obnoxious ass love triangle instead of having Star and Marco just date already. The Blood Moon as a concept is just so flawed in a show like this. You could remove it from Star Versus, and the romance storyline would have been better off for it. This is another reason why I think that this romance plotline would have been vastly more interesting if it didn't end with Star and Marco getting together. If Star and Marco decided to just stay friends, the Blood Moon could have been used as interesting commentary on how works tend to push their male and female leads into relationships with each other, regardless of whether or not they actually have chemistry. Breaking the Blood Moon curse could have been a representation of the show's willingness to defy this common trope and do something more interesting and unconventional with the relationship of their male and female leads. However, in a world where Starco is canon regardless, the Blood Moon plotline isn't just pointless, but actively detrimental to Starco as a pairing. And yet, it's only the second worst moon in this show. Finally, we have the meatiest part of the Starco storyline, the Tom Starship and its inevitable demise. When we last checked in on this pairing, Star was very clearly not invested in their relationship, and Tom spent season 3 in complete denial over it. However, come the season finale, Marco, in a bid to get Tom to save himself during Meteor's attack, tells him that he and Star kissed behind his back. This development would lead to the episode Lake House Fever, where a freak storm traps Star in the titular lake house with Tom and his family, just as she ended their date early to go do something with Marco. Star doesn't just open a portal and leave, because that would mean the episode would be over. After Star confronts Tom over his mom's passive-aggressive attitude towards her, Tom reveals that he knows that Star and Marco kissed behind his back, and that he told his parents about it. While Star gets mad that Tom didn't confront her about it sooner, Tom rightfully points out that he really shouldn't have had to, leading Star to walk out once she seemingly realizes that she's the asshole here, rather than talk about this further. Then Tom nearly gets washed away by a wave until his mom saves him, and after the storm ends, Star decides to cancel her plans with Marco to stay with Tom and his family longer, because they're still boyfriend and girlfriend. Now Star doesn't bother to explain to Tom her mindset behind keeping her kiss from Marco from him, address what she'll do to be a better partner, directly apologize for how she handled things, or have any sort of deeper conversation on the matter, but things are just fine now. Yeah, show, I totally believe that this relationship could still work out, and that continuing to keep Star and Tom together won't be a complete waste of everyone's time. This will also be the final time that Star and Marco's kiss and booth buddies will ever be referenced in any meaningful way again. Which just makes me wonder, if Star and Marco kissing behind Tom's back wasn't going to serve as the catalyst for Star and Tom's breakup, then what was the point of that episode? Hell, what was the point of Lake House Fever? Nothing was accomplished here. There aren't even any signs of Tom getting sick of Star's bullcrap. He's understanding and cool-headed about this to an almost unreasonable degree, given how Star barely owns up to how poorly she handled this whole situation. Well, surely the show has more interesting stories planned for Star and Tom. No. Star Versus continues to do the exact same boring shit that we've seen with these two throughout season 3, where Star's clearly not invested in her relationship with Tom and is in love with Marco, while Tom is trying in vain to make things work between them. The thing that really gets me about this though, is that if it weren't for the fact that it would have cut into time that could have been spent showing off Star and Marco's dynamic as a couple, I think that continuing to keep Star and Tom together after Lake House Fever could have worked if them staying as a couple was explicitly portrayed as a bad thing. Like, this whole incident could have caused Tom to shatter the pedestal he put Star on, and have him get more and more fed up and frustrated with her as Star continues to be uncommitted to this relationship, eventually leading Tom to realize that neither of them are happy with this relationship, and dragging things out any further with her would just hurt them both, with him finally breaking up with Star like he knew he should have back at the lake house. Now this wouldn't be fun to watch at all, but at least a story like this would have been far more interesting than just keeping Star and Tom's relationship in the exact same place until Tom finally starts to get tired of Star's bull in Doop Doop, an episode that comes literally 2/3 into the season. Okay, now to be fair, Season 4 actually does do something interesting with Tom here by drawing attention to how he really doesn't have much of a life outside of Star, leading him to strive to become his own person in Junk and Jana, and a boy in his DC-700XE. While I think that Tom trying to become his own person would have been more effective had he broken up with Star at that point, this is still a really interesting direction to take Tom's character. It's just unfortunate that the show doesn't do nearly as much with it as it could have, with Tom's role in the show going back to being intrinsic linked to the Starco plotline after these episodes. Anyways, come coordination, Tom suggests that he and Star go on a trip together, which Star happily agrees to, only to get cold feet in the very next episode, and putting off telling Tom that she doesn't want to go until the very last minute. This understandably frustrates Tom, and leads him to go off without her. Tom returns to the episode's sad teen hotline, where he finally breaks up with Star. And the breakup scene sucks. Okay, so you'd think that Tom's reason for dumping Star was that he realized that her heart was never in this relationship, and that she's actually into Marco. And that might be what they were going for? Tom says something about their lives heading to different places, which I thought was a really weird thing for him to take away from all of this, but because I've been so mean to this romance plotline, I'm just gonna give the show the benefit of the doubt and assume that Tom learned the right lesson here, with this being his own way of saying that he recognizes that Star isn't interested in a relationship with him. Star, on the other hand, is absolutely infuriating here. You would think that by the end of the episode, Star would apologize to Tom for leading him on and take responsibility for how she unintentionally hurt him, but no! Not only is Star never called out for how her lack of commitment, poor communication, and refusal to be honest with herself about how she really felt led to unnecessary hurt feelings, but it genuinely doesn't feel like Star even realizes what she did wrong here. Literally, the closest thing we get to Star taking any responsibility here is her saying, "I know I'm not the best girlfriend," followed up with, "but I'm definitely not the worst." Like, what exactly is Star's takeaway from this whole mess? Just like Marco with Kelly, it really doesn't seem like Star learned a damn thing from any of this. And as if things weren't frustrating enough, despite Star and Marco basically spending the past year being nothing but dishonest and misleading towards Tom, everything's just cool between them now. No hard feelings or awkwardness, nothing. Things are just fine now. Yet, as hard as it is to believe that things would end this cleanly between Star and Tom after everything that went down throughout their disastrous relationship, it completely pales in comparison to Tom in the very next episode, literally the day after the breakup, giving Marco the go-ahead to date Star. This doesn't feel at all in line with Tom's character. Since his first major appearance, Tom has been deeply insecure about Star and Marco's relationship. Even after Tom and Marco became friends, that jealousy and insecurity over what him and Star had was still very apparent. There was never really a sense that Tom was gradually overcoming that insecurity over Star and Marco's relationship. So to see Tom be perfectly cool with Marco dating Star the day after they broke up, after hanging on to this relationship for so long, just feels really sudden and completely at odds with what we know about him. Now Tom being down with Starco at this point could have felt earned if they, I don't know, had Star and Tom break up back in Lake House Fever and give him time to heal from his heartbreak and move on from his feelings for Star, but we can't have Tom growing away. That would make his support of Marco dating Star believable. That would have taken time away from dragging out this stupid ass love triangle until the last possible minute. No, let's just have Tom be immediately cool with all this, in spite of all the nonsense Star and Marco put him through, because it would make everything easier for them. Anyways, after Tom gives Marco his blessing to date Star, some plot stuff happens that isn't relevant to this section of the video, where the moment that the remaining Starco shippers have all been waiting for finally happens. Star and Marco admit their feelings for each other, and have their first kiss that didn't involve either of them technically cheating on one of their partners. And you know, I could rag on this scene for how corny the dialogue is, how weirdly their kiss is drawn, or how due to this being the fourth to last episode of the show, there's literally no time to actually see Star and Marco's dynamic as a couple. But you know what? When I first saw this scene, I momentarily forgot about how much I hated the way Star and Marco were written this season, and how utterly miserable the Starco storyline was. I was actually happy that these two finally found each other after so long, and for a brief moment, Season 4 of Star vs. the Force of Evil warmed my frigid heart. Before it was immediately frozen over again after witnessing the mother of all god-awful plot twists that led Star vs. to abandon what little narrative cohesion it had this season, culminating in a baffling finale that pretty much ruins the entire show, but not before giving Star and Marco some last-second character assassination that makes me wonder why I ever cared about either of these people. And that, dear viewer, was the story of Starco in a nutshell. What a complete waste of time. This entire plotline was nothing but Star and Marco being thoughtless, irresponsible, miserable people, and the show just letting them get away with it with zero consequences. None of this even leads to Star or Marco growing or learning anything. In fact, Tom is the only player here who actually ended up changing for the better after all of this. This is just a needlessly complicated, pointlessly stretched out, miserable storyline that does nothing but make Star and Marco, characters that I once loved, completely insufferable, and convince me that these two aren't mature enough to handle a serious relationship. It's not even like you can't tell a good story where your protagonist does crummy, irresponsible things that end up hurting their love interest. Adventure Time and Regular Show are two excellent examples of how to do this kind of storyline right. They work because they don't gloss over Finn or Mordecai's messed up actions. They both face long-lasting consequences for their screw-ups, and after some reflection, they're able to recognize their mistakes, hold themselves accountable for them, and use these experiences to grow as people, leading them to have far greater success in maintaining healthy, long-lasting relationships with their next love interests. It also helps that these plot lines aren't dragged out for most of their shows. Oh dear god, how long have I been talking about Starco? Man, I am just a regular sarcastic chorus over here. God, I'm so dead inside. I'm genuinely sorry for the obscene amount of time that I spent talking about the shipping in Star Vs, but there are just so many layers to how horribly the romance is handled here, and it's a massive reason why Star Vs Season 4 is such a drag to watch. With all of that said though, we still have a lot more ground to cover with Season 4. And what's a more appropriate subject to follow up lame teenage romance plotlines with than problem number 2, fantasy racism. Now, racism allegories are always a really tricky thing to try and pull off in a story, especially when attempting to address it on a systematic level. When done well, it can result in meaningful, thoughtful stories that resonate with people on a deep personal level. When done poorly though, it can make a story come across as tasteless and insensitive. In the case of Star Vs, it initially did a pretty solid job with its prejudice allegory. While the first half of Season 1 portrayed the mutant-monster conflict as a very typical good versus evil story, Mutant Independence Day would reveal that the truth was way more complicated, with Star learning and coming to terms with the fact that humans instigated the fighting by massacring the monsters and colonizing their land, leading her to abandon her anti-monster prejudice. Season 2 would continue to make the conflict far less black and white by humanizing the monsters, most prominently Ludo and Buffrog, and portraying them as being forced into poverty by the ruling humans. It's actually some good stuff that adds another layer to the plot. Things, of course, would change in Season 3, where, like the Starco storyline, the prejudice plotline would get significantly more focused, with Star spending the second half of the show pushing for equality between humans and monsters. It's also the point where the prejudice allegory became a lot more on the nose. However, I don't think that lacking subtlety is necessarily a bad thing, especially when it's a show aimed at kids. In fact, Season 3 actually has bits of interesting commentary on prejudice, like how Toffee shows that prejudice comes in many forms, and you don't have to be an actively hateful person in order to have awful, bigoted beliefs through its depiction of Muni's monster expert, this pleasant old lady who claims to care about monsters, but really only sees them as dumb wild animals for her to observe, or how people of wealth and power who also happen to be members of marginalized groups often don't care about the struggles of their people, through Tom's initial indifference towards the subject, before opening up about how, despite being treated better due to being royalty, whenever he's around people who don't know who he is, he experiences the same level of prejudice as other monsters. It's actually a shame the show doesn't delve deeper into Tom's relationship with his demonic heritage. It's some interesting stuff, stuff, and it all culminates in the shocking reveal that King Shastakan, the douchebag Eclipsa was forced to marry, and the Magic High Commission covered up the existence of Meteora, denied her rightful place as Muni royalty, and had her replaced with another baby, all because she was part monster. That said, the prejudice allegory isn't perfect by any means. Going back to Stafari, Star makes a big deal about how ridiculous it is that all of these different non-human races are deemed quote-unquote monsters, yet non-humans who are either from allied kingdoms or of wealth and status are exempt from being labeled as such, despite looking no different from them. This implies that in this setting, the term monster is a derogatory term meant to dehumanize underprivileged non-humans. Yet, everyone in the show continues to call these groups of various races under the umbrella term of monsters, as if the show didn't admit that it's kind of a problematic term within its setting. Yeah, that honestly kind of rubs me the wrong way. So much so that from this point forward, whenever I use the word monster, it's going to be surrounded by heavy air quotes. Also, there's a bit in the tie-in novel, The Magic Book of Spells, where Eclipsa rates the dateability of several monster races, based presumably on a single member of each race she dated, which is honestly kind of f***ed up within the context of Star Versus. Seriously, what the hell, Eclipsa? I thought you were woke. Again, it's far from perfect, but I think that the first 3 seasons handled this prejudice allegory fine enough. So how did season 4 screw it all up? Well, you know how the previous seasons used the racism allegory to advance the plot in interesting ways, and actually had some kind of thoughtful things to say about how it works? Well, season 4 has quite literally nothing to say about prejudice, besides that it's bad. And they will beat you over the head with this statement by constantly portraying most of Muni as being populated by hateful, bigoted, horrible people. Again, a work being subtle about its morals isn't necessarily a bad thing, so as long as it's still able to articulate them in an engaging way. Something that I don't think Star vs. Season 4 accomplishes at all. So much of this plotline is nothing but a repetitive cycle of the citizens of Muni being utterly hateful towards Eclipsa and bigoted towards monsters, and it's just miserable to watch. Now the show tries to add nuance to the situation by showing that there are people that were forced out of their homes because they were stolen from monsters, namely through this one family in the episode Down by the River. However, this attempt to portray the humans in a more sympathetic light falls flat because this family that we follow is shown to all be obnoxious, idiotic, hateful bigots whose home their ancestors stole is so big that there's no way that they could feasibly live in it. Also, this leads to Moon basically forming her own kingdom, populated solely by humans who are either displaced or left under their own will and all hate Eclipsa. So, pretty much an ethno-state. It's not even portrayed as much of an inconvenience, with Moon's literal ethno-state operating pretty smoothly and the citizens adjusting fairly well. Also, all of these people will willingly participate in an attempted genocide later in the season. So yeah, they can all get f***ed. With how bad the prejudice is in Muni, you'd think there wouldn't be an easy fix to convince humans to accept Eclipsa and her pro-monster policies, and that initially seems like what they're going for in episodes like The Literal Cancer Show and Cornball, where the message is that much of the older generation might be stuck in their ways, but there's still hope that the next generation will be kinder and reject the closed-minded views of the previous one, which is a decent enough message for a story like this. However, come Queen Nap, the show very suddenly sees Muni's opinions on Eclipsa and monsters shift in a way that doesn't feel believable or earned, considering how utterly bigoted these people are shown to be, even excluding Moon's ethno-state. Weirdly enough, the cause of this shift in opinion was Eclipsa getting kidnapped and all of Muni being invested in the story, as it's being told by the Lumpy Space Princess at home, who apparently orchestrated the whole thing in order to get more people behind Eclipsa. And it works? So these people hate this political leader largely because she's anti-prejudice, but also don't want to see her get hurt? As if there wasn't an episode earlier this season where literally dozens of people planned on essentially assassinating Eclipsa. I guess we're supposed to assume that all of those people went to the ethno-state? Like, is this how stuff like true crime works? Because it doesn't feel like this is how anything works. Now, despite how repetitive and poorly thought out the prejudice subplot is in this season, it did offer an ongoing thread that showed a lot of promise. That being Globgor, Eclipsa's size-shifter husband, who's been trapped in a crystal prison for the past 300 years, and her desire to free him, despite the Magic High Commission being violently opposed to it. And while they, mainly Romulus, are being dicks about it, they're kind of not wrong to be against his freedom. Unlike the garbage with the human citizens, the conflict with Globgor was kind of compelling, as it actually looked like there wasn't an easy solution as to what to do with him. See, while Globgor was the love of Eclipse's life, and is described by her as being this genuinely sweet guy, he also had a really shady past where he outright killed and ate humans before Eclipse convinced him to become a vegetarian. This kind of leads to an interesting question. What do you do with a man who has done terrible things but has long since become a better person and wishes to atone? Now granted, he and the storyline are held back by the fact that we aren't really given that much insight into Globcor's past or even his role in monster society. Despite this, it was actually kind of an interesting conflict, with Eclipse herself even stating that the issue wasn't black and white. The monster and the queen sheds more light on this statement by portraying Globcor as this sweet, loving guy who's also unstable and a potential danger to others. This makes it all the more unfortunate when the show completely backtracks any moral ambiguity on either side of the Globcor conflict in the follow-up episode Coordination by portraying Globcor as being much more stable and not really a threat to anyone, while Romulus, a character who was up until this point portrayed as a lawful neutral jerk who is at least somewhat well-meaning, and the one most opposed to Globcor going free, is suddenly an irredeemable douchebag who doesn't believe in anything, and free Globcor in the hopes that he'll hurt people so he can justify his and Eclipse's imprisonment. Side note, I can't stand what Season 4 did to Romulus. Sorry to all the Heckapoo stands out there, but Romulus used to be my favorite member of the Magic High Commission. I just have an affinity for big dumb idiots, and I really liked his friendship with Star, but Season 4 just had to throw away that dynamic and flanderize him into a complete tool, just so we don't feel bad about what happens to him as a result of the thing. Then, when Globcor's fight with the Magic High Commission leads to a crowd full of people witnessing him embrace his daughter, the bigoted humans, as well as the Magic High Commission members, sans Romulus, are moved to the point where they decide that they don't want to be bigots anymore and fully accept Globgor alongside Eclipsa. I'm sorry, but this conclusion just doesn't feel earned. Season 4 has done nothing but emphasize just how violently prejudiced the people of Muni are, yet the show expects me to believe that simply seeing Globgor comfort his child was enough to change the minds of all the humans not staying in Moon's ethno-state and wholeheartedly accept him and his family. Because bigots would never go as far as to dehumanize children and families who are part of a marginalized group. Like, maybe this would be enough to change a few minds, but realistically, and this might be my pessimistic worldview talking, having Globgor free and rule Muni alongside Eclipsa would be a wildly controversial decision, especially considering his shady past. Oh, but one guy says that he was just trying to protect his family, so I guess that solves that. And from that point forward, no one outside of Moon's ethno-state has any issues with Eclipsa or Globgor. Now look, don't get me wrong, Coordination isn't a bad episode at all, and I'm in full agreement with the general consensus that this would have been a vastly more satisfying ending to Star vs. the Force of Evil than the dumpster fire of a finale that we ended up getting, but this episode just dumbs down what was shaping up to be an interesting, complicated conflict, and like the romance plotline, feels like way too easy of a conclusion to the Eclipse Globgor plot given the circumstances. I think there was so much more that they could have done with this storyline. Why not give us more interactions between these two through flashbacks that give us a better idea of their past, as well as how they ended up falling in love outside of the Magic Book of Spells. There's even interesting stories that could have been told with Eclipse and Globgor post-coordination, like have Globgor still be mentally unstable and struggling to adjust to this far less hostile environment, all while working to atone for his past misdeeds. Explore how traumatic it was for the both of them to be imprisoned for so long and nearly lose their daughter. There's a lot of intrigue in this storyline that the show only really scratches the surface of, before ending it in a way that feels kind of rushed. I don't know, the whole prejudice plotline suffers from the same problem as Zootopia, where it kind of feels optimistic to a fault. Now with all of that said, despite all of the issues I take with how the prejudice allegory is handled this season, as well as it having a few really questionable elements to it, I wouldn't quite go as far as to say that it's anything outright offensive. As misguided as the prejudice plotline is, you can tell that the writers' hearts were in the right place, and at the very least, they didn't screw up in a way that harms the message. That is, until the final few episodes, where the show goes all in its attempts to humanize hate-filled bigots who are either segregationist or outright genocidal, in a misguided attempt to add nuance to the narrative. even though humanizing hateful racists is like one of the main things that you don't want to do in an anti-prejudice story. There's also the finale, where the thing happens, which, without exaggeration, completely undermines the entire anti-prejudice narrative. You all probably know what I'm getting at here, and I'll elaborate more on this once we cover that god-awful train wreck of a conclusion. As a whole, while the prejudice allegory did initially add a greater deal of intrigue to the story of Star vs., the show simply flew too close to the sun when it tried to explore the issue in further depth, leading the series to fall into some of the pitfalls common in these kinds of plots, resulting in a repetitive, clumsily written prejudice storyline that's heavy-handed in the most miserable way possible, and ending in a way that's completely at odds with the message. Again, the writers' hearts were definitely in the right place, they just bit off more than they could chew here. Now, with so much of this season dedicated to romance and racism, I suppose that you're wondering just how Star vs. finds the time to give closure to all of its other subplots. Well, hypothetical viewer, they don't. Problem number 3. Nothing goes anywhere. Like I said all the way back at the start of this unwieldy monster of a video, Star vs. the Force of Evil was one of quite a few popular cartoons of the 2010s that started out lighthearted and episodic before gradually transitioning into something more dramatic and war-driven. This would result in the scope of the story broadening exponentially, as well as the gradual introduction of multiple ongoing plot lines. There were so many bits of foreshadowing and lore that were dropped throughout the show's first 3 seasons that made it feel like this was all going to lead to something big. So imagine everyone's reaction come the final season, when most of these plot threads ended up amounting to basically nothing. Now, while there are some shows that weren't able to address every single plot point that they set up, with the reason almost always being that they got cut short, more often than not, the threads these shows drop aren't major enough to negatively affect the narrative. There's a sense that the conclusion to these shows would have still been largely the same, and at the very least, you're left with a solid idea as to where things were meant to go. This isn't the case with Star vs., as there are so many storylines and substantial pieces of foreshadowing that were explicitly setting up the plot to go in a certain direction, only for none of it to really mean anything by season 4, with these plotlines either receiving abrupt, unsatisfying conclusions or none at all, and the show pivoting towards a final conflict and resolution that almost nothing in the previous seasons were setting the groundwork for. There are so many dropped plot threads that it leaves me genuinely wondering how much of a plan this show had. We've already been over a few aborted plotlines like these, such as Marco and Kelly's relationship ending almost as soon as it began, as well as the hinted at details behind Globcorp's shady past never being elaborated on, but there are so many more abandoned storylines in Star vs. that I want to go over. Why? Because I want to emphasize just how completely disjointed the story of Star vs. is, as well as Season 4's failure to provide any sort of satisfying payoff to these plotlines. The earliest instance of a storyline in Star vs. going absolutely nowhere occurs in the show's 5th episode, Monster Arm, in which Star's attempt to fix Marco's broken arm results in her accidentally turning it into the titular Monster Arm, a large, grotesque tentacle who soon reveals itself to be sapient and causes Marco to become more arrogant and aggressive. For the most part, it's a very typical zany Season 1 episode, until Monster Arm, upon his defeat, proclaims that he's forever a part of Marco, and the episode ends with the show all but stating that he's going to continue to be a problem later down the line. Now, Monster Arm isn't exactly a compelling character. He's a very typical villain of the week who's evil just cuz. And while his titular episode is fun, I don't think it pushed the idea of this symbiote-esque character negatively affecting Marco nearly as hard as it could have. If Monster Arm was never mentioned again after this episode, I'm almost certain that no one would have cared. However, Monster Arm isn't immediately forgotten about. He very briefly appears in the Season 1 finale, where Marco thinks back to Monster Arm in a decidedly not comedic bit that implies that he's still very much shaken by what happened in that episode. The fact that it occurred in the season finale, which happened to be the same episode where main villain Toffee expresses an interest in Marco for reasons that aren't explained, led many fans to believe that the show was setting up Monster Arm to play a major role in whatever plans Toffee had. As a result, following the Season 1 finale, interest in Monster Arm increased substantially, and he became a major source of speculation within the fanbase. Afterwards, Monster Arm is briefly mentioned in the Season 3 finale, with Marco also glancing at his arm, hinting that Monster Arm is still within him. And then... nothing. Monster Arm is never mentioned again. Miki's cameo in the season 1 finale feels just absolutely bizarre. Interestingly enough, this is the only dropped plot thread that Darren Nefsky straight up admitted was meant to go somewhere, but according to her, they just couldn't think of a way to bring Monster Arm back. Like with Monster Arm, it seems like they had plans for these storylines from the get-go, but never quite worked out the finer details as to how they get from point A to point B. In this case, it leaves us with a character who is clearly meant to be a bigger deal, just kind of disappearing from the story without really contributing anything of worth. The next plotline is something that I never saw get talked about all that much, but ended up really bothering me upon rewatch, that being everything about Eclipse's chapter in the Book of Spells and dark magic in general. In Page Turner, Glossric warns Star about reading Eclipse's chapter of the Magic Book of Spells, saying that it might quote-unquote taint her. When she and Marco later read it, Star is perfectly fine, but Marco is, I guess, tainted? Why doesn't it affect Star? What does it mean to be tainted? Never explained, which is extremely egregious when this ends up becoming an important plot point later down the line in the episode The Hard Way, where Ludo reading from Eclipse's chapter allows Toffee to possess him while still trapped in the realm of magic. Why? How? Again, never explained. Furthermore, in Bon Bon the Birthday Clown, Glossric warns Star about using Eclipse's spell, the All-Seeing Eye, in a way that makes it seem like messing with dark magic has serious consequences. Yet, by season 4, Star is able to casually use the All-Seeing Eye without any problems. I mean, Star wasn't exactly in the best headspace when she first used the spell, as it did lead to her accidentally hurting Marco and Jackie. But wait, was the magic she used on that skateboard also dark magic? Or was that just regular magic influenced by Star's jealousy? I'd also ask why or how Eclipse started messing with dark magic in the first place, but this eventually becomes a moot point because by the time we actually see Eclipse use her spells, they're shown to more or less function the same as regular spells, with the only difference being that they have edgier names and a darker aesthetic. Which begs the question, why is dark magic so much more taboo when compared to regular magic, when the spell with no name is quite literally the only spell that's either explicitly evil or comes at a cost to its user? Where does dark magic even come from? The final few episodes make it clear that it's not native to the realm of magic, so does that mean that it's magic that's altered somehow? How exactly is it altered? Not sure. The show also flip-flops on whether or not dark magic is inherently evil. On the one hand, Eclipse managed to turn out fine despite being super into dark magic. On the other hand, skipping ahead to the finale for a bit, dark magic is also shown to straight up turn people evil. Why are Star and Eclipse the exception? Again, I don't know. Maybe the spell with no name is the only truly malevolent dark spell? But why? Like, the dark spells all perform different functions that are far less destructive than the spell with no name, but they have to come from the same source, right? So why is it that the spell with no name is literally the only spell that does anything to corrupt its user? Dark magic coming at some sort of cost to its user would have actually been a good way to differentiate Eclipse's spells from the normal ones and explain why everyone else frowns upon it, but again, for some reason, this only applies to the spell with no name. And what are the rules here? Nothing about dark magic or how it works is ever explained. Not where it comes from, not the mechanics behind it, not what even makes a spell dark. Nothing. What really bothers me about the lack of clarity and little importance dark magic, barring the spell with no name, has to the story, is that season 2 really felt like it was setting up Star's jealousy to lead her to dabble in dark magic and begin going down this self-destructive path. Something that the end of the episode Baby felt like it was hinting at when it draws parallels between Star and Eclipse, which also makes me wonder if Eclipse was originally intended to be a more villainous or morally gray character. I mean, it's possible that it was meant to be this misdirect, and we're supposed to realize in retrospect that Star being like Eclipse wasn't a bad thing at all. That'd actually be an interesting idea. Yet, despite this queer setup, like I said earlier, Star never has to learn to overcome or deal with her jealousy of Marco and Jackie's relationship, and said jealousy screwing with her magic is just kind of dropped after season 2, alongside any sort of pretense that dark magic was going to have a negative effect on Star, or that her and Eclipse's stories paralleled each other in any meaningful way, which was honestly the most surprising thing that I realized during my rewatch. Seriously, I could have sworn that they did more with Star and Eclipse's relationship. You'd at least think that they'd do something with them both being unconventional and doing things their own way, or both having bigoted controlling mothers, but they just kind of gloss over that. I don't know, it just seems like season 2 was setting up dark magic to be important to both Star's character development, as well as her relationship with Eclipse, but in the end, the spell with no name was the only thing relating to dark magic that actually mattered to the story story in any way, and by season 4, Star and Eclipse don't have much of any influence on each other's actions or growth as people. With the only thing they do with their dynamic here is having Star cycle between trying to get the bigoted humans to like Eclipse and not trusting Eclipse at all. Next, we have quite easily the second most egregious example of a plot point that was clearly meant to go somewhere, but never did. Occurring in season 3's Sleep Dive, where in order to save Star from being trapped in the realm of magic, Marco ends up using Star's wand, which gives him cheek marks, a trait all but stated to be exclusive to the butterfly bloodline, and causes the wand to take a sinister looking form. As you'd expect, this also led to tons of speculation as to what all of this could mean, with many linking it to a popular theory that Toffee and/or Monster Arm has possessed Marco in some way. Yet despite all of the weird lore implications behind this moment, this wouldn't come up again in any capacity until the final episode. And they still don't explain any of it. Marco just uses the wand again like it's no big deal, despite Sleep Dive seeming to imply otherwise, but it doesn't give him cheek marks this time? Except they appear when he and Star are talking about how much they love each other after the Butterfly family did the thing. Why? Why does Marco get cheek marks? What's the implication here? What is any of this supposed to mean? Something 2 nickels. I am genuinely stumped as to what the original plan could have been for Marco's cheek marks and the wand. Everything about this plot point feels completely at odds with pre-established lore, and despite the attention initially brought to Marco using the wand, it ultimately meant nothing at the end of the day. Now, it's already baffling for a show to have this many abandoned plot threads, but what's even more egregious is setting up a plot thread in your final season only to completely forget about it by the time it ends. A Spell with No Name is the third and final episode that follows the spells within Star's wand. While the previous episodes following them were lighthearted and inconsequential, A Spell with No Name is much darker in tone and feels like it was meant to be important to this season's narrative. This episode sees Eclipse's spells trying to contain the Spell with No Name, who threatens to escape the dimension within the wand to spread destruction throughout the entire multiverse, as demonstrated when it kills one of the spells. Things are so dire that the spells are willing to destroy their dimension if it means taking out the Spell with No Name with them, which one of Star's spells reacts to with absolute horror, which communicates to the audience that the lives of the spells within the wand have value and aren't disposable. Just keep that in the back of your head, folks. While the Spell with No Name is ultimately contained, the ominous way it ends heavily implies that it's going to continue to be a problem in the future. Considering that the Spell with No Name is an integral part of the Star vs. lore, being the spell Moon used to drive Toffee's forces back in her youth, as well as the product of the genocidal ambitions of Eclipse's hate-filled lunatic of a mother, it's easy to imagine it having an increased role in the final season. And imagine we must, because this goes absolutely nowhere. Eclipse eventually breaks out the Spell with No Name in the right way to kill a Solarian soldier, and that's pretty much it. Okay, it actually sort of does play a role in the final few episodes, but in a more indirect way, and said role is ultimately pointless because the event that it's linked to is completely inconsequential to the plot, and is barely acknowledged by the narrative. So by all accounts, the ominous ending to A Spell with No Name, and by extension, the entire episode, was completely pointless. How does this happen? How does a show completely abandon a plotline that's explicitly set up in its final season? I desperately wish that I was a fly on the wall in the writer's room during season 4, because this kind of thing does not happen in a show that isn't going through some sort of behind the scenes issues. Oh, but we're not done yet. We still have to look at the canon tie-in novel, The Magic Book of Spells, which was released in between seasons 3 and 4. Now, The Magic Book of Spells is really weird when it comes to tie-in books. Typically, the point of these kinds of tie-ins is to expand upon the show's setting and further clarify things that the show couldn't get to for one reason or another, while not being fully necessary to understand the story and world, as is the case with Gravity Falls Journal number 3 and the Book of Bill, as well as Amphibia's Marcy's Journal. However, there are multiple points in the Magic Book of Spells where it feels less like an expansion of the world of Star Versus, and more like a peek at what Season 4 was originally supposed to be, because the book has several major reveals that read like setup for important plot threads that fans believe will be addressed in Season 4, only for them to never come up in the show, which makes you wonder why they were even in the book to begin with. There are 3 details within the Magic Book of Spells in particular that stood out as being really odd to not include in the show. First off, there's this bizarre hidden message in Queen Skywine's chapter that, when decoded, states that Skywine accidentally sent 16 humans into space, with said humans successfully colonizing a planet and apparently plotting to take their revenge and invade Uni. Given the serious cryptic tone of this entry, story, as well as the fact that the book deemed it significant enough to make the reader go through the effort of translating it, it feels like they were actively setting up this invasion of space mutants to happen in the show. How on earth they planned on squeezing that in when there was so much crap going on in season 4, I have no idea. And apparently Star vs. didn't either, because neither Skywine or the Space Mutants are ever referenced in the show. A far more significant bit of lore in the Magic Book of Spells is the reveal that Queen Selena the Shy is actually part demon. Considering the whole Prejudice plotline, as well as Tom's greater role in the later seasons, you'd think that the Butterfly family not being 100% human would be a massive reveal with very significant consequences. But the Butterfly family having demonic heritage is never brought up in the show itself, and Selena is completely irrelevant to the plot, given that Selena was one of the 3 queens whose tapestry was given explicit attention to in Into the Wand, and the other queens that were name dropped in that episode, Eclipse and Solaria, eventually became important to the overarching narrative. It's easy to believe that Selena being part demon was originally meant to be a major plot point, but for whatever reason, it just didn't pan out. However, both of them pale in comparison to what's quite easily the thing the Magic Book of Spells is most famous for: the introduction of Seth. Seth is an ancient Septarian, the same race that Toffee's a part of, who's revealed to be his superior, and is responsible for radicalizing him and countless other monsters in his mad quest to destroy all humans. Seth is mentioned sporadically throughout the Magic Book of Spells, serving as a constant thorn in the Butterfly family's side, and was feared and despised even by the queens sympathetic to the plight of monsters. The book also reveals that Seth was the one to give Toffee the order to kill Moon's mother, Queen Comet. However, beyond being Toffee's superior and the one who orchestrated Comet's assassination, the book doesn't give that much insight into Seth as a character or his crimes against Muni. All we know about him is that he had been around for a long while, was controversial even among monsters, and absolutely despised humans. The most notable thing that fans took away from this, though, was that the book never revealed what happened to him after giving the order to kill Comet. That, combined with Toffee's really cryptic threat at the end of Battle for Muni, led many to reasonably believe that Seth was still out there, and he was going to come back in season 4 to serve as the show's true main villain. There were so many people beyond hyped to see Seth in season 4. What was his deal? Where has he been all this time? How was Star gonna beat him? So we waited and waited and waited and waited and waited and oh look, the show's over. Death is never mentioned once in the entirety of Season 4, and to add insult to injury, during a Reddit AMA, following the series finale, Darren FC revealed that, apparently, Seth had died a while ago. And you waited until the show was over to tell us this? Why? You know, if I didn't know any better, this might not have been the original plan for Seth. Look, I think you get my point. The Magic Book of Spells is a bizarre tie-in to Star vs. the Force of Evil that feels like it was originally intended to serve as setup for what was to come in Season 4, only for hardly anything in it to really matter in the end. And yet, we're still not done. There is one lingering plot thread left to talk about. One storyline that was so obviously supposed to take Star Vs. in a far different direction. One storyline so clearly meant to be integral to the show that its ultimate abandonment is not only 100 times more baffling than any of the other aborted arcs I've read about, but the decision to do so retroactively made the character it centered on into a complete joke. That's right, people, it's time to talk about Toffee. Introduced midway through Season 1 as Ludo's new second-in-command, Toffee would quickly establish himself as the main antagonist of Seasons 1 and 2 of Star vs. Force of Evil. He was your classic Knight of Cerebus, the villain that doesn't play around, the guy who's there to tell the audience that the kid gloves were off and things were about to get real. Toffee was a cold, calculating, no-nonsense villain who played everyone around him like absolute chumps without breaking a sweat. At the time, the fanbase absolutely adored him for the darkness he brought to the show. More importantly though, there was so much mystery behind this character. Toffee left the audience with so many questions, like how he has so much intimate knowledge of magic and the Butterfly family, or what exactly he was after and why. There was so much interesting stuff that Star vs. was setting up about Toffee, and people were absolutely invested in seeing where everything surrounding him was going. Yet, as the show went on, every new appearance of Toffee seemed to raise more questions than answers. Even when it's revealed that his endgame was to destroy magic, the audience was still left wondering who who he was and what his motives were by his defeat in the Battle for Muni special. However, in his final moments, we were left with this cryptic line: "Only I know how this all turns out." Yeah, it was very clear to everyone watching that this wasn't the end of Toffee. The fanbase was certain that we've yet to see the full extent of Toffee's machinations. Something big still had to be on the horizon, and it wouldn't be until then that we'd finally understand the full extent of Toffee's motives and his connection to the Butterfly family. Guess what ends up happening?
Only I know how this all turns out.
The way that Toffee is ultimately handled by the show is just really bizarre to me. I have generally never seen a work of fiction that completely undermined its main villain like Star Vs. did with Toffee. Despite him being set up as the end-all be-all villain of Star Vs., despite all of the weird questions surrounding him, despite his cryptic final words indicating that he'll return, Toffee never comes back or has anything about him explained, leading everything surrounding him feel like total nonsense. The show presents so many questions surrounding Toffee that feel like they were meant to be answered at some point, but just never were for whatever reason. How does Toffee know about the Whispering spell when it's something only the Butterfly family should have knowledge of? How did he know destroying the wand would send him to the realm of magic? How did he even know the realm of magic existed when it's all but stated that prior to Star, no one knew about this place, with the possible exception of Selena? Were they planning on having Toffee be linked to Queen Selena somehow? How did Toffee know about the temple that Eclipsa and Globgor hid away in? Was he also meant to be connected to Eclipsa? How did he know that Ludo reading Eclipsa's chapter of the Magic Book of Spells would let him possess him? Again, why does Eclipsa's chapter even let Toffee do this? How did Toffee even corrupt magic when he was in the realm of magic to begin with? Does he also know some version of the Whispering spell? How? Why is he even a giant goop monster fused with corrupt magic while in there? Why didn't he eventually lose his mind and memories like everyone else who later enters the realm of magic? And most importantly, why does he even want to destroy magic in the first place? The closest thing the show gives us to a coherent motive as to why Toffee is doing any of this is that it's because he's salty moonblasted his finger off after he killed her mom. That's literally it. Oh, but according to the Reddit AMA, Toffee was apparently a scholar who studied the Butterfly family, an aspect of his character that is never alluded to in show, aside from this easy-to-miss detail in Independence Day, where Toffee is shown reading some book all about the wand. That explains everything. You know, except for why on earth the Butterfly family would let sensitive information like this be published in a book, how no one knew about the realm of magic before Star when this mysterious author apparently did, why Toffee became a giant goop monster while in the realm of magic but Star didn't, how the book's author obtained any of this information, and virtually everything else surrounding Toffee, and how he was inexplicably able to pull off all of the crap that he did. It makes perfect sense when you don't think about it at all. That's not even getting into whatever the hell they were setting up with Toffee and Marco in the season 1 finale. Toffee acting like he has some sort of greater plans for Marco, and Marco being the one character to very briefly get to the otherwise stoic Toffee, made it seem like they were building up some sort of dynamic between the two that'd be expanded upon in the future. These two never interact again after this. Then there's the Magic Book of Spells, which just makes everything surrounding Toffee even more confusing. Admittedly, we do get a bit of insight into Toffee's motives, with the reveal that Seth radicalized him. Granted, the book doesn't touch upon his past, philosophy, or anything that would make Toffee into a compelling character, but it's at least something, I guess? Why the only bit of semi-important information on the main villain's past and motives isn't in the main show is beyond me. Interestingly enough, if you recall the questionable bit in the book, where Eclipsa rates the day ability of monsters, one entry centers on a Septarian who resembles Toffee and is described as having character traits similar to his, with Eclipsa even saying he probably wants to kill your mom, a very clear reference to Toffee killing Moon's mom. This bit seems to suggest that Eclipsa and Toffee used to be an item, which is a massive detail that raises so many questions. Yet, like 90% of the Magic Book of Spells, the implication that Eclipsa and Toffee were a thing is completely irrelevant to the show's plot. Despite this, as well as Toffee knowing about Eclipsa and Globgor's temple, heavily suggesting a connection between the three, there's nothing in the series to indicate that Eclipsa even knows who Toffee is. Then why was this in the book then? Now it isn't like a villain needs to have everything explained about them in order to be engaging. Slade is one of my favorite villains of all time, and one of the reasons why he works so well is because he's such an enigma. The difference between Toffee and Slade lies in the intent behind the way they are written. Teen Titans was wholly committed to keeping Slade a complete mystery for the entirety of its run. There wasn't a solitary hint to his motives, his origins, or even what his face looked like. The intent behind Slade was for him to be this terrifying, unknowable evil who existed solely to torment the Titans. Toffee, meanwhile, isn't meant to be this unknowable force of evil. There are a number of explicit hints throughout the show that point to there being far more to Toffee than just being this manipulative jerk. He was designed to be a multi-layered, complex character. I know this for a fact because Darren Nevsky has claimed in interviews that Toffee is, or at least was at one point, a well-intentioned extremist fighting for the rights of monsters, with her even comparing him to the likes of Magneto.
So I always wanted the villains to have a perspective, and definitely with Toffee, I always thought of him more as a Magneto character. You know, like he's not wrong, but he's going about things the wrong way. You know, so I think it's more interesting. Because I don't know if you guys have noticed, we get into it, we continue to get into it, but you know, the mutants maybe have not treated the monsters the best, and that's something Star is really learning about. And Toffee, of course, has his own perspective on that.
Okay, neat. Why wasn't any of this in the show then? There isn't a single moment in the entire series that indicates that Toffee ever had any good intentions or remotely gives a crap about anyone other than himself. He's consistently portrayed as a heartless creep who treats everyone, including non-humans, as nothing more than disposable pawns, completely devoid of the humanity and tragedy that makes characters like Magneto so compelling. Oh, hang on. We actually do see a bit of Toffee's past in Season 4's Meteor's Lesson, which shows us that Toffee wasn't always this irredeemable jerk in a nice suit. You see, back in the day, Toffee was an irredeemable jerk, but he didn't dress nearly as nice. This really could have been a great opportunity to give Toffee depth by showing us that there was a time where he was kinder and more vulnerable, to show just how far he's fallen since then. Instead, Toffee is portrayed here as nothing more than a petty bully who breaks Glostric's arm for basically no reason, and would have broken his other arm if Meteor didn't mess him up. The closest thing we get to Starverse's portraying Toffee as the well-intentioned anti-villain the writers claim that he is him saying that magic was dangerous immediately after it was used to hurt him specifically, in retaliation for acting like a bag of dicks. This is heavily implied to have been the moment that cemented Toffee's hatred for magic. Getting his ass kicked by a magic baby. Real Magneto type right there. I swear, Toffee has way more in common with that hack fraud Ultimate Universe Magneto. The thing about all of this is that Toffee having shallow, petty motives would have been perfectly fine if he was meant to be this petty, self-serving asshole who didn't believe in anything that we're meant to love to hate, but Darren Nevsky herself said that that's not what they were going for with him. He's supposed to be a morally complex character, yet the show does jack shit to actually delve into his beliefs and motives. Toffee is in essence a character who we're told is really interesting and deep, without actually showing us the stuff about him that makes him interesting and deep. So what gives here? Why is there such a big disconnect between what Darren Nevsky says about Toffee and how the show itself actually characterizes him? Well, I personally suspect that there wasn't ever really a concrete plan for Toffee's character in the first place. Looking back, it really feels like the show was just making up a lot of Toffee's story as it went along, which would actually explain a few things, such as how Moon the Undaunted reveals that Toffee murdered Queen Comet, making him a pretty significant figure in Muni history. Yet, for some reason, Ludo and his minions have literally no idea who he is upon his introduction, so they either hadn't come up with the plot detail that Toffee killed Comet yet, or Toffee is such a boring, forgettable person that not even committing a political assassination could get anyone to remember him, which is hilarious to me on so many levels. I'm just gonna pretend that that's the canon reason for that. The point that I'm trying to make with this whole diatribe is that I don't think that there was a single unified vision for Toffee. It's clear that they wanted to do something more with him, but I don't think they ever figured out what exactly that something was, and just threw crap at the wall to see what would stick, before coming to the conclusion that, for one reason or another, Toffee just wasn't working, because the show would not spend so long setting up so much about their main villain, only to ditch them without delivering on all of that setup halfway through the series run, if they had a clear, concise plan for them. As a result, despite having so much intrigue and promise, by the end of Starverses, Toffee winds up feeling like this half-baked, underwhelming villain who I'm not sure how I'm supposed to feel about. Was he meant to be this cool, cunning, well-intentioned extremist, a heartless sociopath who didn't believe in anything, an enigmatic figure with deep ties to the butterfly family, just some self-important douchebag wannabe conqueror? Was his demise tragic? Was it well-deserved? Was it intentionally written in a way that made Toffee look like a total punk? I have no idea, and I don't think the show did either. Toffee, I think, is perfectly emblematic of all of the storytelling problems that plague Star vs. the Force of Evil. The show had this really cool idea for a character that they were slowly building upon, but for one reason or another, they simply weren't able to deliver on anything that they were setting up about him. Leading Toffee's storyline to end on this anticlimactic note, that answers none of the questions that they raised about him. As a consequence, all of the genuinely interesting build-up and lore implications surrounding him just kind of feels like it never really mattered, and it makes the biggest bad of Star Vs come across as nothing more than a one-dimensional asshole, motivated solely by his lost finger, and a character that I just can't take seriously anymore. Like, he did all of this because he wanted his finger back, and died almost immediately after he got it. My god, what a pathetic villain. I'd even go as far as to call him the second most pathetic big bad in this show. Overall, while Star vs. definitely had some interesting ideas here, it feels like the show simply wanted to do way too much. It ended up needlessly complicating the story by adding a bunch of subplots and expansions to the lore that don't feel like they were fully planned out, resulting in a jumbled, convoluted, unfocused narrative where half of what it sets up goes absolutely nowhere. If the narrative didn't have so many moving parts and zeroed in on the most important character arcs and plot beats, then we definitely would have had a more satisfying story, or at the very least, a villain with a clear motive. Speaking of which, given how Toffee's no longer the big bad, I suppose you're wondering just who ended up replacing him as the main villain of the final season. I mean, surely Star vs. saved their best villain for last. Problem number 4. God, these villains suck so much. Like the season before it, it would take until the mid-season finale for season 4 to firmly establish a main villain. While Meteora replacing Toffee as the big bad of season 3 was widely accepted, given her prominence in the series as Miss Heinous, and how the first 2 seasons properly set up the idea that there was more going on with her than it seemed, when season 4 seemingly showed its full hand as to who the main villain was in Coronation, people were in complete disbelief, because it seemed like all signs pointed to the final boss of Star vs. the Force of Evil being none other than Mina Loveberry. You know, Mina. The Sailor Moon spoof character who's a complete joke. The character that no one ever gave a solitary crap about. A character so completely unimportant to the show that I felt zero need to mention her in this monstrosity of a video up until this point. But no. No! This couldn't be right. Sure, season 4 hasn't been great, but Star vs. wouldn't do something as utterly stupid as making their final villain f***ing Mina Loveberry, right? They have to be setting up some sort of twist, right? Right? So between Coronation and the 4th to last episode, Here to Help, the fanbase, myself included, entered critical cope levels as we all tried to figure out when and how Toffee, or maybe even Seth, could still step in and claim the role of the show's final villain, even as the season continued on without either one having any sort of relevance to its plot. However, as we entered the final handful of episodes, just when it seemed like Star vs. was fully committed to having Mina King Loveberry as its final villain, leading an army of like-minded bigots jacked up on Solarian magic and killing all of the monsters in the kingdom, the end of Here to Help drops a massive bombshell. Mina didn't orchestrate all of this. No, she was a mere subordinate to someone else, the true main villain of the season. Now, who exactly was the depraved maniac who gave Mina the means to lead a straight-up genocide? Well, as it turns out, the big bad all along was none other than Moon Butterfly! Wait, what? Okay, before I get into my thoughts on this plot twist, I feel like we need to go over Moon as a character, because oh man, have I been dying to talk about Moon. Throughout the first 2 seasons, Moon is portrayed as being stern and kind of stuck up, but ultimately a caring mother to Star. Season 3 would see Moon play a more active role in the story, where we get to see more of Moon's flaws, most notably her prejudice against monsters. Despite this, it did seem like Moon was gradually starting to overcome her prejudices as she came to sympathize with Eclipsa and learns of the corruption with within the Magic High Commission. That is, until Moon attempts to straight up kill the rampaging Meteora in front of Eclipsa, who is again her own mother, leading to a series of events that I still don't fully understand that results in Moon getting trapped in the realm of magic. All of this to say that in the first 3 seasons, Moon is portrayed as a deeply flawed character who, despite being antagonistic at times, has morals and is ultimately on the side of good. A far cry from someone willing to orchestrate a genocide, so one would think that season 4 spent quite a bit of time detailing Moon's transition into an outright villain, right? Despite having an entire season of television to properly set up Moon becoming the villain, there is quite literally zero foreshadowing of her face heel turn until earlier in the very same episode where her villainy is revealed. So they're pretty much doing the 2010s Disney movie thing and waiting until the last possible minute for them to actually do anything villainous. However, it's much more egregious here because not only did the show have so much more time to build up to this reveal, but as we'll soon find out, nothing about Moon's actions here make the slightest bit of sense. Okay, so let's recap the story with Moon in Season 4 so far. After Star manages to find Moon and return her to Muni, Moon decides to leave the kingdom out of mistrust towards Eclipsa. We'll get into why she doesn't trust Eclipsa in a bit, because oh boy is it something else. Anyway, after Moon stumbles her way into leading an ethno-state, she returns to the ruined Butterfly Castle to get her day planner, leading her to run into Mina Loveberry, who's been hiding out in the castle and asks her to use her magic to restart the Solarian program, a genocidal campaign led by Queen Solaria to destroy all monsters by supplying her army with the massive magical suits of armor and blades that will cause any who are cut by them to die a slow, painful death and overthrow Eclipsa. Now, given what will happen later in the story, you think that this would be the point where we see Moon jump off the slippery slope and team up with Mina out of both prejudice and her vendetta against Eclipsa, with the rest of the season continuing to build them up as threats by showing them assembling their army. However, because that's what a good season of television would do, that's not what happens here. Instead, Moon is adamant of her disapproval of the Solarian program and rejects Mina's offer. Granted, she's still willing to leave Mina, this murderous, unhinged woman-child, to her own devices without doing so much as warning Eclipsa out of petty spite, seemingly uncaring of the people that she'll potentially hurt. Wow, what a sympathetic character. But it's clear at this point in the series that Moon draws the line at enabling a genocide and has no interest in working with Mina. What changed since then that led Moon to team up with Mina? Well, a good show would show us Moon gradually slipping, becoming more and more resentful of Eclipsa as she begins winning the people of Muni over, with her acceptance of Globgor, a man with a dark past that she was taught to fear, and by extension, monsters in general, being the final straw that leads Moon to fully succumb to her bigotry and paranoia, and team up with Mina to fulfill her genocidal ambitions. Again though, this is Season 4 Star Versus, so of course we don't actually see Moon's change in character, or get any explanation as to why she changed her mind, because if they showed its once hero character developing into a genocidal villain, then it wouldn't be a shocking twist. Who cares if it's directly at odds with how she was characterized earlier this season? Why make sense when you can have a shocking twist? Actually, I lied just then. You see, as it turns out, Moon actually didn't want to commit genocide. In fact, she never wanted anyone to get hurt. All of this was simply supposed to be a means of intimidating Eclipsa into surrendering the throne. Let me reiterate. Moon, wanting to stage a coup, teamed up with Mina Loveberry, someone who she knows is a violent, unstable bigot, gave her an army of hundreds of similarly bigoted people, and armed them all with horrific weapons of war specifically designed to commit genocide. She did all of this. And the show sincerely expects the audience to believe that Moon didn't want casualties of any kind, and that she didn't expect that these violent bigots would use the weapons they were given to try and kill people.
This was never about hurting monsters, Mina. You.
You know, it's one thing to have a character do something pointlessly idiotic for no reason than to advance the plot, but it's a whole nother story when the character's idiotic actions don't in any way align with their character. Like, I'm not losing my mind here, am I? You all see how Moon willingly giving a maniac the means to commit genocide is at odds with the notion of her not wanting people to get hurt, right? These are not the actions of someone who wanted anything other than a complete massacre. Let's just think about Moon's actions here. If she just wanted to intimidate Eclipsa and not murder her and all of the monsters in the kingdom, Why did Moon need an army of hundreds of Solarian warriors? We see that a single one of these guys are these massive powerhouses able to overpower everyone in the kingdom, including Star, Globgor, and Eclipsa, with the latter having to break out the spell with no name, a taboo spell that takes a lot out of its caster after a single use, and risks leaving Muni in absolute ruin to put a single one down. If Moon didn't want to outright kill Eclipsa, monsters, and pretty much anyone who opposed her, then why did she feel the need to assemble an entire army of these guys, when just a couple of them would have been more than enough to get Eclipsa to surrender? Now that I think about it, if Moon cared so much about there being no casualties, then she could have at the very least forbid the use of the Solarian swords, which again causes anyone who makes contact with them to die a slow and painful death. Moon was overseeing the construction of the armor. What was stopping her from refusing to power it unless Mina got rid of the swords? Unless I'm missing something, I don't think there was any indicator that Moon wasn't fully aware of what the Solarian weapons were capable of. In fact, why did Moon even need to keep Mina around for her plans? Moon knows that Mina is straight up willing to kill children, and that the two of them have very different goals. What was preventing Moon from jacking the first set of armor Mina finished assembling for herself, use it to non-lethally take down anyone in her way, drive Eclipsa and her family out of the kingdom, and take the throne? There were so many better ways that Moon could have staged her coup without arming hundreds of bigots with weapons created for the intent of committing genocide. Yet Moon claims that
Mina was already planning to overthrow Eclipsa. Trust me, I stopped her from doing far worse.
See, now that's some bullshit.
What do you mean stopping her from doing worse? Mina had no way of powering the Solarian armor or weapons without Moon's magic. There is literally no feasible way that a complete idiot like Mina fucking Loveberry would be capable of doing something worse than leading an army of hundreds piloting these giant war machines with the intent of overthrowing the kingdom. Moon's claims that she had good intentions and did all of this without wanting to kill anyone makes more sense as her flimsily trying to avoid blame for the Solarian warrior's actions when she's caught, than her truly being sincere in her desire for no one to get hurt, like the show genuinely wants us to believe. I guess that Moon is just the biggest idiot on the planet.
I never told the soldiers to attack the monsters. You know how overeager Mina can get.
Oh! So Moon did know that the Solarians would want to hurt innocent people. She did know that she couldn't cruelly control them. Moon was completely aware that her actions would put the lives of the Muni citizens that she claimed to care for in jeopardy. That was just a sacrifice Moon was willing to make, I guess. My god, why am I meant to feel anything but complete contempt for this character? This was never about hurting monsters. Who the fuck does Moon think she's fooling? Oh shit, that actually came out way more intense than I intended. Like, holy crap, I have, like, genuinely no idea where that came from. I swear this show is doing things to me, man. Now this all begs a question. Why is Moon doing this? If Moon isn't actually a genocidal, hate-filled lunatic, then what exactly was her motive for teaming up with Mina Loveberry? Simple. Moon doesn't trust Eclipsa. Why? Well, it's because she blames Eclipsa for stranding her in the realm of magic during her fight with Meteora and getting separated from her family for several months. You know, Meteora? Eclipsa's own daughter, who Moon tried to kill right in front of her just as she was starting to get through to her. I'm not gonna sit here and claim that Meteora was a saint, but is Moon, despite being a parent herself, so devoid of basic empathy that she can't see why Eclipsa would step in and stop her from killing her own daughter? Wow, what a sympathetic character. None of this would have even happened if Moon didn't act rashly and just let Eclipsa talk her down. Now, if this was treated like a shallow, petty motivation, then that'd be fine. But while Moon's actions are portrayed as wrong, her grievances with Eclipsa are treated as legitimate. Not once does the show point out just how nonsensical of a justification this is for her quite frankly horrifying actions, and how Moon only really had herself to blame for getting trapped in the realm of magic. If you ask me, an actually believable motive that doesn't make Moon look entirely horrible would be making Globgor the one she doesn't trust. Unlike Eclipsa, Moon would actually have legitimate reasons to be fearful of Globgor. Again, Globgor used to be a violent person, if not an outright warlord, who killed people. You could have had Moon, despite her grievances, reluctantly accept Eclipsa's rule until Globgor is freed from his crystal prison and allowed to rule alongside her, leading Moon to stage a coup out of fear that he's unstable and could end up hurting people. Granted, this wouldn't make Moon teaming up with Mina to arm hundreds of bigots with weapons meant to carry out genocide any less monumentally stupid, but at the very least, I could just call her stupid and not this heartless, self-serving creep motivated by petty spite. Except that wouldn't be possible because in the second to last episode, it's just casually revealed that Moon was the one who gave Romulus the order to free Globgor. Let me reiterate, Moon was more than willing to free Globgor, knowing full well that releasing him in his current state could make him a danger to the people of Muni, all out of petty spite towards Eclipsa. Wow! What a sympathetic character! And the sheer hypocrisy of Moon doing the exact same thing that everyone feared Eclipsa would do is never pointed out by the show. You had an out, show. There was a completely coherent motive staring at you straight in the face, and you just threw it away. Now, Moon pulling all of this crap wouldn't be a problem if she was intended to be this heartless, hypocritical, vile person who didn't believe in anything. And while she's clearly depicted as being in the wrong here, we're ultimately meant to see Moon as this sympathetic anti-villain, and not as the spiteful, hateful, selfish, idiotic, bigoted, despicable excuse of a human being that she actually is. Keep in mind that even if Moon staged a coup without arming bigots and endangering innocent lives, by all accounts, her endgame here was to return Muni to its segregationist status quo. Even if she doesn't want them all to die, Moon has made it painfully apparent that she doesn't want monsters in her kingdom. But if Moon is meant to be no longer segregationist at this point in the story, then the show did a piss poor job of communicating that. Again, why am I meant to sympathize with this character? Because her bigotry stops at straight up genocide? And the worst part is, by the end of the show, Moon is just completely forgiven for all of her atrocities. I'm not joking. This isn't a Steven Universe type situation, where the finale didn't have time to explain whether or not Steven forgave the Diamonds for all they've done, only for the movie in future to clarify that he still very much despises them. No, Star completely and unambiguously forgives Moon for selfishly endangering the people of Muni, willingly giving Mina the means to commit genocide, and nearly causing several of her friends to die a slow and agonizing death due to her sheer incompetence earlier that same day. Also unlike the Diamonds, where they, especially White, are portrayed as still being kind of full of crap, and the show makes it very clear that fixing their mistakes is the bare minimum, Moon is treated like she's fully redeemed in the end, and doesn't need to face any consequences. Now what does Moon do that, according to the show, absolves her of her literal war crimes? Well, Moon's grand act of redemption here is helping Star do the thing. An act that results in even more harm than what Mina was planning by an infinitely larger margin. Also, she said that she was sorry, and that's just good enough for Star.
Mom, you messed up. Big time. And usually when a queen messes up in this family, bad things happen to them. Even though we aren't queens anymore, we still get to decide what kind of family we want to be. And I want to be the kind of family where moms mess up and we figure it out.
Star? What the fuck are you talking about? Messed up? Messed up? What do you mean, Moon messed up? Messing up is forgetting to take out the trash last night. What Moon did here was not just messing up. It was a straight up act of treason. An act of treason that nearly got countless innocent people killed and forced you to kill countless more by doing the thing. And Moon did all of this because she's a bigoted idiot who'd rather team up with a genocidal nutjob to stage a coup than admit that the meteor situation was her own damn fault. Moon has quite literally done nothing to warrant this level of grace from Star, especially when she just learned about this betrayal like an hour ago. Is there a gas leak in here? This isn't how people work. This isn't how anything works. I just... I'm sorry. I think I just need a minute. Moon was never really a character I was ever all that invested in. Beyond her kind of interesting backstory, nothing about her ever really stood out to me in the first 3 seasons of the show. She was your standard, stern parent with a heart of gold who contrasted her more free-spirited daughter. She filled her role effectively enough, and I feel like that was the general consensus within the fanbase. However, by the end of the show, I think that I speak for most of the fandom when I say that I fucking hate Moon. I genuinely can't recall seeing a show fumble quite this badly in its attempt at portraying a character sympathetically. Season 4 wants to act like Moon had good intentions of some sort, when it has done literally nothing but portray her as a self-serving, spiteful idiot who's more than willing to endanger the lives of the people of Muni, all in service of her irrational, one-sided beef with Eclipsa. Yet Starversus expects the audience to ultimately forgive her just a few episodes after it reveals the true extent of her depravity, because she helped Star do something that the show doesn't seem to understand is even worse than what Mina was planning. Moon is directly responsible for basically everything bad that happens in season 4, and the show doesn't give her as much as a slap on the wrist. She never has to work to earn back the trust of others. She never has to face consequences beyond Star being mad at her for like a couple hours tops. Everyone just lets her off the hook as if she displayed anything in the way of sympathetic or redeeming traits this entire season. Oh, but she has a dead mom. That automatically makes her sympathetic, even after willingly arming violent bigots with these horrible weapons created for genocide out of a combination of prejudice, spite, and idiocy. That's how that works, right? I swear, this is genuinely forgiving Orochimaru levels of nonsense here. Okay, maybe it's not quite that bad, but my point still stands. I'm sorry, but even for the standards of a Disney twist villain, the writing for Moon is absolutely abysmal. Zurg from Lightyear was a better Disney twist villain, and I've never even watched that movie! Actually, I'll take it a step further. Moon is the absolute worst Disney twist villain, and it isn't even a competition. At least Hans' monologue once he revealed his true colors wasn't half bad. At least Robert Callaghan actually had a sympathetic motive, and contrary to popular belief, would admit that killing Tadashi was his mistake in the Big Hero 6 series you probably didn't even know existed up until now. I can't really think of anything redeemable about Bellwether, but at the very least, she was deliberately written to be the main villain of the movie she was in. Oh, did I forget to mention that? You see, Moon, despite her opposition to Eclipsa being one of the main conflicts of the back half of Starversus, despite her being the driving force behind nearly everything that goes wrong in Season 4, Moon isn't supposed to be the villain. Let me explain. When Moon figures out that, surprise, surprise, Mina, the bigoted psychopath that explicitly told her that she wanted to restart a genocidal campaign, actually wanted to use these terrible weapons meant to spread death and ruin Moon gave her to hurt people, she finally decides enough is enough and tries to deactivate the spell empowering Mina and her army. And it doesn't work. As it turns out, Solaria is the only person able to undo the spell. And yes, this reveal does come completely out of nowhere. Moon, who again, apparently didn't want to hurt people, didn't think to check if there was a way to reverse the spell she intended on using to empower violent bigots, just in case they decide to act like violent bigots, because once again, Moon is a complete idiot. With her powerless to stop her and her army, Mina turns on Moon and forces her to escape with the others, allowing her to go through with her genocide that was totally never Moon's plan. That's right, folks! The completely nonsensical twist of Moon being behind everything and turning her into the biggest moron on the planet was all done so they could make Mina f***ing Loveberry the true main villain of Season 4 and the final boss of Starversus the Forces of Evil. This is really what they're going with. The really sad thing about all of this is that despite all of my complaining about this stupid twist, Moon being the main villain of Starversus the Force of Evil is actually a brilliant idea. No, seriously, if you weren't going to bring back Toffee, Moon would be the most logical choice as the series' big bad. All throughout the show, whether it be pushing Star to be something that she isn't, and threatening to send her to St. Olga's, or resisting Star's efforts to do something about Muni's prejudice problem, Moon has always been at odds with Star getting progressively more rebellious as the series went on. Given Moon's bigotry and control freak tendencies, her eventually becoming a villain doesn't sound all that far-fetched. Hell, the way they presented Moon talking about hunting down Toffee's forces at the end of Moon the Undaunted kind of made it feel like this was her start of darkness. The idea here isn't bad at all, but the execution is just awful. Not only did the show barely attempt to properly set up Moon's descent into villainy, but they don't even commit to it, opting to try and portray Moon as this sympathetic anti-villain we're ultimately meant to forgive, despite how selfish and horrifying her actions are, then replacing her with a much less threatening, one-note character. Now imagine if Starversus had purposefully set Moon up to be the true villain of the series from the start, and fully committed to it. Because while Moon completely fails at being a sympathetic villain, I think that that if she was purposely written to be this utterly despicable, irredeemable piece of crap, then she could have been an amazing love-to-hate villain akin to Odalia Blight. At the start of the show, Moon could have still been initially presented as this stern but seemingly benevolent queen, with red flags like threatening to send Star to St. Olga, a place that essentially brainwashes princesses, not being dwelled on because, well, she has to be the good guy. The show says so. This would reflect Star's initially black and white worldview, until Munipendence Day comes in to shatter that idealized vision of Muni that both Star and the audience once had. Then, starting in Season 2, the narrative would really start to bring attention to how truly controlling and dismissive Moon is, as Star begins thinking for herself and questioning the system Moon and many of the queens before her maintained. At this point in the story, it's apparent that there's definitely a darkness to Moon, but there's still not quite enough there to call her a straight-up villain. That is, until Season 3, where we start to see who Moon truly is. When we get a look into her past, what if Moon's encounter with Toffee wasn't the only time she used the spell with no name? What if, unbeknownst to Star, in her pursuit of vengeance, Moon would start abusing the power of the spell to massacre countless monsters, regardless of their innocence, completely disregarding her mother's desire for peace and equality, with the love that she once had for her mom being slowly replaced by resentment towards her for dying and a blind hatred for monsters. Back in the present, Moon still maintains this facade of being rational and caring until Eclipsa is freed. As the season continues, Star would gradually start growing fond of Eclipsa, and through her, she gains a better idea of just how corrupt and broken the system is in Muni, and it drives Moon up a wall. She starts seeing Eclipsa as a threat to her grip on Star, leading her to become more and more antagonistic and irrational, culminating in Moon, in a grand act of spite, attempting to painfully kill Eclipsa's daughter under the flimsy pretense of protecting Muni. By Season 4, following Eclipsa becoming queen and essentially desegregating Muni, Moon completely goes off the deep end. She begins secretly plotting against Eclipsa, senselessly blaming her for allegedly taking Star away from her by filling her head with these progressive ideas, while refusing to accept that her irrational hatred and desire to control Star is what's creating the rift between them. Her schemes to sabotage Eclipsa would get progressively more extreme as she continues to delude herself into thinking that it's all for the betterment of Muni and not to fulfill her irrational vendetta against Eclipsa and monsters, to the point of ignoring the dangers her actions are putting the citizens in, as well as how a few of them are actually coming around to this whole equality thing, culminating in her coming to the conclusion that if she wanted to have control over her daughter again, then Eclipsa, along with the other monsters, filling her heads with these ideas of equality, have to die. If this was the direction that they went with Moon, then I think she would have made for an absolutely phenomenal villain. Unfortunately, we're living in the bizarre reality where for some reason, Mina Loveberry is the big bad of Star vs. Season 4, and I have to talk about why she's literally one of the worst villains in anything ever. Dear God, this show had so many choices for a final villain, and this is what they went with? Mina Loveberry being the final boss of Star vs. the Force of Evil is already a baffling concept in its own right, but the show ends up executing this idea in the worst way possible. Okay, let's just back up for a second. I feel like I need to provide some insight into who Mina is, and why exactly her being the main villain is a terrible idea. Mina is a magical warrior that Star idolized, as revealed in her debut in Season 2's Starstruck. Over the course of the episode, Star gradually realizes that Mina isn't the hero she thought she was, being both completely out of her mind and a dick who wants to take over Earth. Despite this being the debut of what would be the show's final villain, virtually nothing about this episode is important. The entire episode is played almost entirely for laughs, establishes nothing about Mina aside from her being kooky, and while you'd think that her status as Star's former idol, who she sort of befriended, would have greater importance to the story or make the conflict more personal, aside from briefly mentioning it a few times, Star and Mina's relationship with each other is all but irrelevant to the plot after this episode. By Season 4, Star and Mina don't really see each other as anything other than obstacles in the way of their opposing goals. In fact, if Star didn't meet Mina until Monster Bash, quite literally nothing would change. I think you're already seeing the problem with Mina, but let me go on. Her next appearance will be in Season 3's Moon the Undaunted, where she's just kind of there. You could remove her from this episode and nothing would change. She'd then play a major role in Monster Bash, where she kidnaps a bunch of monster teens and later reveals that Miss Heinous is Meteora. She tries and fails to kill her due to Star's intervention before getting scared off by Romulus and the Royal Guard. Mina's final pre-Season 4 appearance would be Divide, where she's shown to have gotten her ass kicked by Meteora off screen. Our main villain, everyone. And that's seriously everything with Mina before Season 4. Unlike Meteora, who was an important character and a recurring threat throughout the first 2 seasons before becoming Season 3's big bad, Mina has left almost zero impact on Starverses prior to Season 4. 2 of her 4 on-screen appearances were basically cameos, and of her 2 major appearances, only one of them, Monster Bash, served to advance the plot in any way. And even then, Mina didn't even need to be in that episode really. Star needs someone to crash the party that's more of a physical threat than Meteora at that point. Just have Rasticor, Meteor's hulking brute of a right-hand man, who is still recovering from being blown to bits in Season 2, come in fully regenerated at this point so he can wreck house. Meanwhile, Romulus, who already shows up later in the episode, could have very easily been the one to accidentally let slip that Miss Heinous is actually Meteora's daughter. Okay, so far, the character who will be the final boss of Starverses is a joke villain who is almost completely incidental to the show, only does one thing that's important to the story throughout her 4 appearances in the series that could have very easily been achieved by different characters, and has only a single episode where she poses any sort of threat to anyone. Are you starting to see why Mina being the final villain of this show is a bit hard to grasp? That being said, Season 4 could see Mina grow and develop into a more threatening, serious villain. After all, the show managed to do this masterfully with Ludo, who spent the entirety of Season 1 as this walking punchline. And if the show can make this grumpy little guy, who wears nothing but a potato chip bag, into a legitimately threatening villain, surely it could do the same for an immortal super soldier bent on genocide. Right? Will in the Wild is very easily my favorite episode of Star vs. The Force of Evil because of how much of an absolute vibe shift it is for Ludo's character. It's a tense, atmospheric episode that follows this silly cartoon villain who's lost everything, desperately fighting for survival. Despite spending the first season as this ineffectual comedy villain, for the first time, we get a chance to see just how truly resourceful and determined Ludo is when pushed to his limit. As the episode goes on, this joke of a villain gradually starts to feel like a genuine badass as we see him work his way up from nothing and manage to inspire fear and loyalty from the very predators who tried to eat him. And by the end of it all, he stumbles upon a terrible power that he fully intends on using to wreak vengeance. This was the episode that completely changed everyone's perception of Ludo. Over the course of a single 11-minute episode, Ludo would go from a punchline to a genuinely cool, tenacious villain, and would continue to develop into more and more of a threat as he expanded his forces and gained greater control of his wand, culminating in Bonbon the Birthday Clown, where after going through so much development, manages to get a win over Star by stealing the magic book of spells, fully cementing his status as a credible threat to our heroes.
You're probably wondering who I am, so let me introduce myself. I have waged a war on the Butterfly family for years. I burned the magic book of spells to ashes. I fused with the most powerful relic in existence. I amassed an army large enough to conquer this wretched land. I'm Ludo of Various, and you have my wand! Only I know how this all turns out. It turns out you did.
Now with all of that in mind, I want you all to ask yourselves, do you think even for a second that Season 4 gives Mina even a small fraction of the character development Ludo got? When Season 4 was airing, I was desperately waiting for Mina's Ludo in the Wild moment, where she proved just how terrifying of a threat she was, and earned her right to be called one of Star's greatest foes. But it just never happens. There's never a sense that she's truly transitioning from a joke villain to a viable threat. Mina is inexplicably written the exact same way as she was all the way back in Season 2, goofy-ass voiced and all. She still acts like this absolute clown, with the show never letting up with the jokes about how she's quirky and completely nuts. Yes, Ludo still had comedy to him too, but they knew when to dial it back when he needed to be portrayed as a serious threat. Mina, meanwhile, feels like such a joke at all times that even when she's about to enact a genocide, I still couldn't take her seriously as a threat. It definitely doesn't help that Mina is just painfully unfunny. Like, Holy crap, is she f***ing annoying. Yes, we get it. You're kooky. Now actually do something that makes you feel the least bit threatening. Again, Mina is a murderous, hate-filled, immortal super soldier. Even with how silly Mina's voice and design are, it couldn't have been that hard to make her into an intense villain. The closest thing we get to Mina growing into more of a threat is her slowly assembling her suit of Solarian armor. While this is meant to instill a growing feeling of dread, it doesn't work because we're barely given an idea of how dangerous this armor is. The Solarian warriors haven't been mentioned by name until more than a third into season 4, and the closest we get to seeing what they're capable of is their brief depiction in Star's history book all the way back in season 1's Independence Day. And even then, it was so far back that I'm pretty sure most viewers didn't even recognize that the Solarians were meant to be the same armored soldiers from that episode. What's even weirder is that the show initially makes it look like Mina only had a single suit of armor for herself, never even hinting at her actually assembling hundreds of these things until the very end of the 5th to last episode, which I don't get because prior to seeing a Solarian in action in the final handful of episodes, no one really had any reason to believe that just one of these guys would be something far worse than anything Star has faced before. Because again, we barely had any context as to what a single Solarian soldier was capable of. When actually showing Mina amassing an entire army do more to build her up as a threat, why make this a twist? Oh, and to make matters worse, not only does the show completely fail at making her feel even mildly intimidating, but it also makes the really strange decision to try and play Mina, the genocidal bigot defined solely by hate, who is more than willing to hurt children, as a tragic character. I don't even mean it in a no one's born evil type way that serves as a cautionary tale as to how people's minds can be poisoned by rancid, hateful rhetoric. I mean that, while Mina's depicted as being outright evil, and the show never remotely suggests that she should be forgiven, she's also portrayed in a way that makes it seem like we're supposed to have some level of genuine sympathy for her. Now, before I go into this any further, I just want to clarify that the questionable implications of the show's narrative obviously aren't reflective of the beliefs of the writers in any way, and that no one who watched Star Vs. would be stupid enough to come out of this feeling bad for bigots. I mean, for one, that would require people to like season 4. In all seriousness though, this is just an instance of a well-meaning writing staff working on a deadline, not quite recognizing the potential unfortunate implications of their work. I want to make it very clear that me personally finding the way Mina's handled here to be deeply problematic isn't any sort of moral failing on the writer's parts, and I have absolutely no ill will towards the people behind this show. With that said, hold on, let me just get my soapbox over here. And okay. People like Mina exist in the real world, and they are completely unworthy of your sympathy. Ultimately, I don't give a damn about the kind of person someone like Mina used to be. Mina is a grown adult capable of making her own decisions. If Mina still chooses to cling on to her bigoted beliefs and use them as justification for hurting people after 300 years, then that's on her. I don't care that Mina's mentally unstable. I don't care that she misses her fascist buddies. At the end of the day, Mina is still a hateful, heartless piece of crap who gleefully boasts about how she's going to commit genocide. And I don't think that trying to portray a character like this as being tragic in any capacity is a good idea. Oh, but Mina isn't in control of her actions. Solaria's magic made her that way. Well, hypothetical straw man slash Mina stan, who almost certainly doesn't actually exist because no one likes this character, to that I say, did it though? We really don't get much information on how Solaria's magic affects people beyond making them more aggressive, so there really isn't anything to suggest that her magic was what made Mina into such a horrible person. Case in point, after The Thing undoes Solaria's magic and depowers the Solarian armor, it doesn't cause Mina's personality to change at all. She's still that same unhinged, smug bigot. Meanwhile, one of the annoying denizens of Moon's ethno-state, who we explicitly see jacked up on the same magic Mina uses, decides that she isn't as hateful as she thought she was, and is really sorry for participating in an attempted genocide. All of this tells me that Mina has complete agency here. Even so, at the end of the day, Solaria didn't force Mina into this life. Mina was a grown woman who willingly chose to blindly follow Solaria and use Solarian weapons to aid her in massacring God knows how many monsters. Hell, we don't even get much of an idea as to what kind of person Mina was before joining Solaria's army. We spend at most a minute delving into Mina's past, and unlike with Meteora, where the show used that brief time to portray multiple points in her life and paint a clear picture of the person she used to be and why she is the way she is, all the brief flashback with Mina tells us was that she was just some perfectly sane rando who got suckered in by Solaria's bullshit. Admittedly, Mina starting out as just some generic villager is an interesting idea that shows just how extremist propaganda can turn even the most unassuming people into something utterly monstrous. And it'd work even better if Mina were the least bit threatening. However, this scene fails to make me see Mina in a more compelling, sympathetic light like the show seems to want me to. She was just some lady with little in the way of a well-defined personality who Solaria radicalized into this murderous asshole. Again, this is not the kind of character that a work should be gunning for me to feel any sympathy for. I feel like Starversus just completely misses the mark as to how you make a bigoted villain interesting. Just look at characters like Frollo and Bellows. Bigoted villains like them are great, not because they have any sort of humanity or sympathetic traits, but because of the sheer depth of their depravity. These are characters who are completely devoid of nuance because that's just how bigots are in the real world. They're basic people who don't operate on any sort of rationale. That said, these characters are made compelling not by clumsily trying to portray them as tragic like Mina, but by the way these works explore the terrifying lengths they'll go to justify their atrocities in service of their senseless hatred, by showcasing the ways that they delude themselves into believing that they're the heroes, by displaying the ways that they try to rationalize their own hypocrisy. Starversus could have made someone as murderously bigoted as Mina Loveberry interesting without dipping into the unfortunate implications that come with trying to humanize a character like this by delving into just how warped and depraved a person would have to be to justify doing these cruel, awful things. How deep down, when you peel back all of their fanaticism, people like Mina believe in nothing. However, we can't have that, because that would require Starversus to spend time doing things with this character, which leads into the biggest reason why Mina is such a terrible villain. Mina doesn't do anything. You'd think that being the season's big bad and all would mean that Mina would have a far greater presence in its narrative, but no. Mina doesn't show up until Ghost of Butterfly Castle, a third of a way into the season, and is almost completely disconnected from the season's plot up until the final handful of episodes. Yes, it's revealed that she was the one who tried to turn Eclipse to stone back in Yada Yada Berries, but so what? The entire point of that episode was that it ultimately didn't matter who was the first person to try turning Eclipse to stone, because there were a lot of people out to get her who were actively planning on doing the exact same thing. Mina just so happened to beat everyone else to the punch. Big deal. From that point forward, the only presence Mina has in the story before the multi-part finale is her briefly appearing at the tail end of 2 episodes, building her stupid piece of armor that again, we had little context as to what it was capable of, and her crow showing up at the end of Coronation as if to tell the audience, guys, we're being serious. Mina's actually the final villain. Please be invested in this plot instead of asking when Toffee's coming back. That's it. And even when she finally does something noteworthy in the final few episodes, she's still largely disconnected from the core conflict. I say this because none of the characters care about Mina in any capacity. Like I said earlier, Star and Mina's connection to each other is all but irrelevant at this point. Star briefly mentions that she used to look up to her, and that's literally all their relationship amounts to here. Like, see this?
You're out of options, princess! Mina! I'm giving you to the crow of this couple to surrender Eclipse and her husband. Don't even think about trying any more of that magic blasty funny business like you did to Doug.
Mina, get back here and fight! I'm gonna knock the cheese right off your cracker, you no-good helicopter head!
This is the only interaction our main hero has with our main villain in the final season of this show. There's no drama between Mina and any of the characters that would make her conflict with them personal, which is weird since Mina idolizes Eclipse's mother, who's her exact opposite in every way, and was complicit in her daughter's suffering by helping to keep her existence a secret. You'd think that this would lead to some sort of dynamic between Eclipse and Mina, but they don't share a single interaction. Between this, how little relevance she has to the narrative up until her invasion, and just how uninteresting she is, Mina feels less like an actual character and more like this plot device to create an impossible situation in order for the narrative to justify Star doing the thing. And while I say it's Mina's invasion, it's not really hers, it's Moon's. Like I said earlier, Moon is the one actually influencing the plot. She's the one doing the heavy lifting in this scheme. By all accounts, Moon's the one calling the shots, and Mina is nothing more than her flunky up until the end of the third to last episode. And the way that they go about making Mina into the actual main threat just makes her look even more pathetic. Remember, the Solarian armor is completely useless without butterfly magic. Mina needs this magic in order for her plans to go anywhere, so how does she intend on getting what she wants? Well, her grand plan here is to ask Moon nicely. Moon, who again, apparently doesn't want people to get hurt, and explicitly knows that Mina's a violent maniac. And it works! Let me rephrase that. Mina didn't get to where she is at the end of the show because she was cunning and manipulative like Toffee, resourceful and determined like Ludo, or the juggernaut daughter of one of the most powerful people in all of Muni like Meteora. No, Mina was only able to accomplish anything this season because A, Moon is the biggest idiot on the planet, and B, Moon's magic is conveniently unable to undo the Solarian spell, even though it was able to activate it. Something that was never even alluded to up until that point. Mina is such a sad, pathetic excuse of a villain that the only way the narrative could justify her becoming a major threat, and not just Moon's minion, which would have been a much more sensible use of her character, was through contrived writing that made the people around her completely incompetent. And to top it all off, Mina doesn't even get to fight Star or any of the main characters. She gets very easily taken down by a corrupted unicorn, more on that later, and that's it. Wow, what a threatening villain. Unfortunately for everyone, this doesn't kill Mina, and after she nearly commits both regicide and genocide, for whatever reason, Moon suddenly makes a half-hearted attempt at convincing Mina to get help, as if she ever viewed Mina as anything other than a pawn in her plans, in a last-ditch attempt at getting the audience to feel anything other than complete contempt for these two awful, awful people. I also sincerely hope the show isn't suggesting that there's a correlation between Mina being mentally unwell and her being a cruel, hateful person. I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt and say that that's not what they're going for here, but if they are... Also, after Mina reaffirms that she's a remorseless bigot, in a villain line that could have been good if the show just stopped making her zany and quirky for 5 damn seconds, like Moon, they just kind of let her go. Yes, leave the violent lunatic who led an army of hundreds in an attempted genocide to her own devices. What could possibly go wrong? Oh god, is this what people think Steven Universe is? Yet despite how horrible Mia's actions are, despite the hoops the show jumps through in order to justify her being the big bad, a lot of people, myself included, still see Moon as Season 4's true main villain. Not only because of how utterly despicable Moon is, but because again, Moon is the one actually doing things here. The fact that this is what so many people took away from these two is really just a testament to how utterly horrible Moon is, and how pathetic and ineffective of a villain Mina is. So now I guess it's time to talk about the Magic High Commission, since the show decides to turn them into straight up villains who work with Moon and Mina. While I personally think that they worked much better as morally gray, well-intentioned characters, and I don't think that their transition to outright villainy is done very well, admittedly, they don't piss me off like the other villains in this season do. In fact, I originally didn't have a ton to say about any of them. I hate what they did to Romulus, but my feelings on him aren't any more complicated than I liked it better when this character wasn't a douchebag. Meanwhile, Omnipraxis Prime exists, I guess. I honestly never really felt all that strongly towards him back when the show was good, and Season 4 did nothing to change that. And then there's Heckapoo. Initially, I just thought that the writing on her was just kind of weird, but the more I thought about it, the more the way that Star vs. handles Heckapoo honestly really bothers me. More specifically, her relationship with Marco. Despite Heckapoo participating in the conspiracy that ruined Meteora's life, as well as Season 4 portraying her as being bigoted and corrupt, this, for some reason, doesn't affect her friendship with Marco at all. By Season 4, Heckapoo's a straight up antagonist motivated by bigotry, yet they still have her and Marco hanging out as if she isn't at odds with Star and Eclipsa. Why Marco's still cool with Heckapoo when Star had to have told him about the shit that she helped the Magic High Commission pull is never addressed, seemingly because the show was afraid to challenge Marco and Heckapoo's dynamic due to how well liked it was by fans. Because who cares if the two of them still being friends is at odds with the direction Season 4 took the Magic High Commission? We gotta keep that dynamic the same, so we'll just have Marco knowingly pal around with the bigot. That's a way better decision than actually trying to make sense. Also, back in the fantasy racism segment of the video, I kind of lied about Heckapoo not being racist anymore. It's later revealed that she, alongside the other Magic High Commission members, are in support of Moon's coup so Muni can be segregated again. Granted, Heckapoo does draw the line at Mina committing genocide, and decides to save Star and the others, still points for her for not being a completely one-note bag of dicks, but this development honestly feels like it comes too late, considering how utterly awful the Magic High Commission are this season. There's a good idea for a character arc here, but the show completely speedruns through Heckapoo's development lane this season, and it just isn't very satisfying. Now you'd think we'd be done here, but there's actually one more awful villain in season 4 who I really want to talk about. That being Solaria. Despite her being long dead by the start of the show, and having very limited screen time outside of her chapter in the Magic Book of Spells, I think that Starversus still woefully mishandles her in a similarly frustrating way that it does Moon and Mina. As we've already discussed, Solaria is Eclipse's genocidal maniac of a mother who spent her entire life trying to destroy all monsters through the Solarian program, radicalizing numerous people, most notably Mina, and transforming them into super soldiers with ungodly power. As the person who made Mina love very into what she is now, as well as being one of the main reasons why the bigotry in Muni got as bad as it did by the show's start, Solaria is essentially the greater scope villain of the entire series. Despite this though, Solaria's legacy doesn't have nearly as strong of a presence in Starversus as it really should. Prior to season 4, Solaria is only mentioned once in season 2's Into the Wand, and unless you read the Magic Book of Spells, there's nothing that really indicates that she was anything other than just another queen who also happened to be Eclipse's mother, which sucks because her presence could have added a lot to Star's journey in realizing just how messed up the prejudice in Muni is. Given that it's all but stated that the Mumin soldier Star's friends betrayed in the reenactment of the Great Monster Massacre back in season 1's Munipendence Day were actually Solarian warriors, I think that this would have been the perfect time to introduce Solaria as this figure celebrated by Muni, and who Star idolized as this brave hero. It's a small detail, but I think that attaching a face to the Great Monster Massacre would have made Star's realization that her ancestors were violent colonizers hit even harder. Imagine Star having to grapple with the fact that Solaria, her great times 10 grandmother, this person she looked up to all of her life, was nothing more than a genocidal madwoman. Granted, they did kind of try doing something like this with Star and Mina, but again, barely anything came out of it, and the relationship doesn't remotely matter outside of Mina's debut episode. Another really disappointing thing about Solaria was that she ended up getting killed while Eclipse was still a kid. Considering that Eclipse would grow up to oppose everything that Solaria stood for, it would have been interesting to at least hear about the two of them clashing with each other, which could have led to their relationship souring, and culminate in Solaria, I don't know, orchestrating the conspiracy that got Eclipse and Globor crystallized, as well as Meteor thrown in St. Olga's and replaced with another baby. I mean, having Shastakan being the one behind it is fine and all, but again, how much harder would that twist have hit if it was all done by someone of the butterfly bloodline? Instead though, the show barely touches on this relationship, to the point where Eclipse being Solaria's daughter isn't even addressed until the final handful of episodes. What I'm getting at here is that Solaria and her horrific legacy should have been this looming shadow present throughout the show, and the shining example of the Butterfly family's corruption. That way, Mina talking about restarting the Solarian program in Ghost of Butterfly Castle would actually be this big oh shit moment, because Solaria wouldn't just be this rando queen we've heard almost nothing about unless you read the Magic Book of Spells. She'd be this terrifying figure that persisted throughout the series, and anything involving her had to be bad. Yeah, making Mina the main villain would still be a terrible idea, but at the very least, there would have been a far greater precedent for it if Solaria had a strong presence in the narrative. So okay, Solaria doesn't play as big of a role in the series as she could have, but what could Starversus have done with her limited screen time for me to consider her to be just as poorly written as Moon and Mina? Well, admittedly, her chapter in the Magic Book of Spells is a solid enough introduction to Solaria, portraying her as this violent, irrational, completely unhinged bigot obsessed with her plans of genocide. It also depicts her having a relatively positive relationship with Eclipse? In fact, despite how utterly despicable the book depicts Solaria as being, her chapter ends in a way that feels like we're meant to feel some sort of sympathy for her. Huh. Anyways, we don't get our first real glimpse at Solaria in the show proper until the third to last episode, and she's unfortunately toned down quite a bit from the book. As opposed to being this unhinged paranoid killer, Solaria is just this boisterous warrior who isn't portrayed in nearly as loathsome of a light as you'd expect a genocidal bigot like her to be. One could argue that it makes sense, given that this scene is from the perspective of one of her supporters, which, okay, fair enough, but I don't think this should have been the one time in the show where we see Solaria in action. There should have been at least one flashback prior that shows just how cruel and hateful Solaria is. Oh, and look, she brought baby Eclipse. They even have a cute little moment together to show how much the genocidal hate monger loves her. Yep. Starversus is actually humanizing Solaria here. Oh boy. Again, I have to emphasize that my problems with how the writers handled very serious topics like fascism and bigotry is not meant to be an attack on their characters. They had good intentions with this story, they just made a writing decision here that I personally don't agree with. That being said, Solaria is a fascist who radicalized numerous humans into being every bit as hateful as she is, and had them throw their lives away for the sake of her war that killed God knows how many people. People like her also exist in the real world, and willfully enable the hateful beliefs and actions of people like Mina Loveberry. Even when compared to Mina, this is the exact wrong character you want to try and humanize, especially in an anti-prejudice narrative. The way that they're portraying Solaria here would be like if the Owl House wanted us to believe that Emperor Bellus's love for his brother was in any way sincere and was worthy of any sort of sympathy. Look, I'm all for giving villains depth, but again, there are ways to make bigoted villains interesting without trying to humanize them. Oh, but the show doesn't stop there. For some inexplicable reason, in the finale, when the ghosts of the past queens return to watch the living butterflies do the thing, Solaria is depicted as being reformed. Yeah, the woman who spent her final moments as a violent xenophobe bent on monster genocide is just against it now. She's even cool with her granddaughter being part monster. I guess she really chilled out in the 300 plus years since she died. But like, it's still such a weird 180 from what we saw of her previously. There's also this weird bit where Mina begs Solaria to aid her, only for Solaria to look at her with complete contempt. And like, girl, you're the reason she's like this. Where do you get off acting like you're on some sort of moral high ground? Especially when what your ancestors are about to do is even worse. What I find to be really interesting about this exchange is that, out of context, it actually works as effective commentary on how fascists in power couldn't care less about their supporters and would gladly feed them to the wolves without a second thought. In a better season of television, this would have been personally done to emphasize Solaria's cruelty, but because this is Starversus Season 4, it's done completely by accident. The show wants us to be on Solaria's side here, as if she didn't willingly lead Mina down this path, because I guess she's sorry for attempting genocide. Granted, this is exactly what Mina deserves, but it doesn't exactly portray Solaria as sympathetically as the show seems to want. The funny thing about this, though, is that Solaria having a change of heart off screen doesn't really mean anything to the story. Maybe it would have if she had any sort of presence in the series, and they didn't wait until the final few episodes to even address that Eclipse is her daughter, but as it stands, nothing's really gained from portraying Solaria as remorseful or redeemable. All that really comes out of this is a brief exchange between her and Eclipsa that ends with them parting on relatively amicable terms, which is I guess something that Starversus really wanted to do for some reason. I'm sorry, but I really don't like the direction that they went with Solaria here. Just like with Mina, the show's attempts at presenting Solaria as anywhere close to being redeemable or sympathetic just fall flat with the kind of character she is. Solaria would have been so much more effective of a greater scope villain if she were this remorseless grifter who didn't believe in or care about anything. It's just so weird that in this anti-prejudice narrative that condemns the bigotry and corruption of Muni's monarchy, there isn't a single queen that's portrayed as being irredeemably evil. I mean, we got Shastakan, but he's barely a character and only married into the butterfly family. Him being a dick doesn't pack nearly as much of a punch. Look, I know it's weird that I have so many criticisms about Solaria when she has so little of a presence in the show, but man, they were sleeping on gold with this character. There was so much potential for Solaria to be this really intense greater scope villain, but they ended up barely using her and took her in this absolutely bizarre, kind of problematic direction. Overall, I think that Moon, Mina, and Solaria take the issues people have with the diamonds and just multiplies them by 1,000. The build up to their roles as major villains is non-existent, they're not compelling in any way, and the show's attempts to get me to feel literally anything for these hateful, bigoted, petty people falls completely flat. They definitely have the potential to be genuinely strong, love-to-hate villains, but the show just completely mishandles them. Okay, so now that we've thoroughly dissected the events of Season 4, and it's evolving into an absolute fustercluck, that only leaves us with one question. How's Star gonna get out of this jam? Well, it's quite simple. You see, kids? Problem number 5. Star commits genocide on all magical beings in the infinite multiverse. Well, here we are. It took us a while to get there, but we're finally talking about the series finale, Cleaved. Now, as you can imagine, the grand finale is one of the most important things for a show to get right. It's the final note you leave your audience on. End on a high note, and your show will forever be remembered as a classic. End on a sour note, and it'll forever tank your show's reputation, regardless of what came before it. I'll give you one guess what category this finale falls under. The finale of Star vs. the Forces of Evil is very easily one of the most universally despised cartoon finales of all time. It's so infamous that even people who haven't watched a single second of Star vs. know that it ends with Star killing every magical being in the show's nigh infinite multiverse.
We were able to come up with an ending that has something for everyone. Now let's see what the fans on the internet think.
Before I get into it though, I think that it's only fair that I start off by listing all the things I liked about the finale. Ahem. Jenna admitting to Marco that she really does consider him a friend is a really sweet moment and was one of the few times season 4 made me feel a positive emotion. That's it. That's the only redeemable thing about the finale, and by extension, the last 7 episodes of the show. Now, while this segment is meant to be about the finale, I'll also be discussing the penultimate episode, The Tavern at the End of the Multiverse, since it directly leads into why the series finale is so hated. I mean, I guess it doesn't really matter, since all of the episodes from Sad Teeth Hotline onwards pretty much function as one long TV movie anyways, but whatever. Anyways, at this point in the show, Star is at her lowest. Mina's about to commit genocide thanks to the actions of her selfish dipshit of a mother, and she's seemingly powerless to stop her. It's then, apropos of nothing, Star proclaims that she hates magic, and completely blames its existence for the situation they're in. Not the corruption and bigotry of the people in power who abuse magic for their own gain. No, magic itself is the problem, and is inherently evil, I guess. In fact, Star hates magic so much now that she comes up with a plan to destroy it, with Glostrick and her tapestry pretty much giving her the go-ahead to go through with it. This is presented by the show as the morally right thing to do. Oh god, there is so much wrong with this. First off, literally nothing in the show was setting up the idea that magic was inherently bad and needed to go. Up until this point, magic has been treated as a neutral force that could be used for good and evil. There have been numerous times that magic has been shown to be beneficial, such as it being the only line of defense against Toffee, a character who again, despite Darren Nefsey's statements, is portrayed as a murderous, completely irredeemable bastard, as well as giving Meteora, someone who had suffered so much for so long, a second chance at getting the life she deserved. Yet despite one of the central themes of the show being that nothing is ever black and white, these legitimate instances of magic being beneficial are never brought up in these final few episodes, and magic is just completely bad now. Again, nothing in Star vs. was setting up this idea. Now admittedly, Glostrick being in support of Star destroying magic doesn't feel out of left field. It honestly makes some of his actions make a lot more sense in hindsight, namely his complete cooperation with Toffee back in season 2. In fact, looking back on Meteora's lesson, where he creates a stable time loop by giving the first humans magic and cementing Toffee's hatred of it, the show seems to heavily imply that Glostrick orchestrated all of this with the intent of destroying magic. Okay, good job, show. You properly set up that part of the story. The thing is, though, this still does nothing to communicate to the audience that magic needs to be destroyed. The only thing that the foreshadowing they did with Glostrick tells me is that destroying magic was always his endgame. What led Glostrick to want magic destroyed? I have no idea. The show seems to want me to think that it's because, well, magic is bad, obviously. But again, the show has done literally nothing in its more than 100 episodes to back up the idea of magic being inherently evil. All throughout Star vs., pretty much every major threat to Muni has always been the result of the bigotry and corruption of the people in charge. In the grand scheme of things, human centaurs never being given magic wouldn't have prevented them from subjugating monsters through other non-magical means. Like with, you know, weapons. Ludo and his posse, the result of Muni discriminating against them and forcing them into poverty after colonizing their ancestors' land and massacring their people. Meteora? She was robbed of her birthright out of prejudice and thrown into a place that taught her to hate herself, leading her to grow up into an emotionally stunted ticking time bomb just waiting to go off. Mina? She was one of many people radicalized by Solaria's bigoted rhetoric. The only villain that we can't say for sure was created as a result of the prejudice of the humans in charge is Toffee, and that's only because we don't know a damn thing about him or his motives. Sure, destroying magic will fix the immediate situation, but it does nothing to address the rampant bigotry within Muni. Even without magic, magic, there will still be a neighboring ethno-state full of bigots who attempted to stage a coup. Oh, but one of them said they felt bad about it, so I guess that means everything's okay now. Second, and this is the main reason why this resolution is so despised, Glosric outright states that the destruction of magic would kill him, and by extension, every magical being in the infinite multiverse. Yet Star, and by extension the show, doesn't seem to care at all. Which is weird because we spent several episodes focusing on the spells in Star's wand that were firmly established to be sapient, something that the show now chooses to conveniently ignore, as if earlier this very season there wasn't an episode maintaining that the lives of these spells have value and shouldn't be thrown away. Like, if destroying magic was always the show's endgame, then why make a trilogy of episodes humanizing the spells? It's not like these were plot important episodes either, so what was the point? All these episodes end up doing is making Star's actions in the finale even more horrifying than they already were. Keep in mind, this isn't an insignificant amount of people that are going to die. This very season establishes that the wand contains every spell created by every queen in history, with each queen's spells having their own section of the wand that they live in. Star's section of the wand alone has upwards of several hundred magical beings populating it. It's not unreasonable to assume that this is the norm for each room in the wand. Hell, if we want to get really pedantic, the Magic Book of Spells establishes that one of the queens, Crescenda, created over 5,000 spells. Keep in mind that a single spell can consist of multiple beings, and said beings are able to reproduce. So yeah, that's a lot of fully sentient beings who are going to die as a result of Star's actions, potentially just as many, if not more, than the monsters living in the kingdom that Mina planned on killing. That's not even accounting for all of the other magical beings in the multiverse, but again, the show refuses to acknowledge it. This also unintentionally gives off the implication that one sentient race has inherently less value than another, given that it's apparently worth sacrificing all magical life in the multiverse to save a group populating a single kingdom. I really don't think I need to explain how messed up that is, especially in an anti-prejudice narrative. The wildest thing about this, though, is that the show seems to realize, at least to some extent, the messed up implications of Star destroying magic, but just doesn't want to address the crippling moral ambiguity of Star's actions, because the finale is supposed to end on a happy note, and the show doesn't want us to feel bad. It's the reason why, come the third to last episode, Omnipraxis Prime, who up until this point had moral standards, is suddenly written as a douchebag who's completely down for genocide like Romulus. It's why Heckapoo, despite being unwilling to risk her skin to do anything more than save Star, Marco, and the other butterflies, even though given her powers, she probably could have at least greatly minimized the potential casualties, is inexplicably chill with Star doing something that is guaranteed to kill her. It's why the only on-screen casualties are the unsympathetic douchebags, while Heckapoo and Glosric's deaths are off-screen. It's why the show completely disregards all of the innocent magical beings that are no doubt dead after all of this. Save for the magical flying unicorn head that literally everyone hates because this godforsaken finale could at least let me have something! And like, why even do this? They could have made up any sort of solution that lets Star beat Mina without killing all magical life in the multiverse. What made them want to end Star Versus this way? If they were going for more of a bittersweet ending here, then they completely missed the mark by refusing to address or dwell upon the sheer amount of harm that Star destroying magic caused. This is just another instance of Season 4 not being as mature as it thinks it is. It wants to have this, at best, extremely morally dubious solution to a horrible situation, but does all it can to try and present this decision in the least morally ambiguous light possible. Finally, the thing that I probably find the most baffling about Star destroying magic is that it completely undermines everything the show tried to do with both Star and its narrative. Throughout all of the highs and lows of Star's character, there's always been one thing that stayed consistent. Star does things her own way. Star doesn't care about what's expected of her. She doesn't care what fate has to say. Star will face the impossible and find a way to save the day. Yet when Star was faced with the impossible decision of either letting the monsters of the kingdom get slaughtered or destroy magic, which would end the lives of countless magical beings across the multiverse, she just chooses to destroy magic without a second thought. This just doesn't feel like Star. Star's stubborn, she's determined, she's rebellious. The Star I followed throughout the show would see this difficult situation where she's presented with two options that would lead to innocent people dying no matter what, go screw that, and do her own thing where she saves everyone in her own Star way, because that's just what she does. Star just throwing her hands up and deciding that destroying magic is her only option completely goes against everything she stands for. What's even worse is that the show presents this as Star breaking the vicious cycle of the butterfly family abusing their power and screwing over everyone else, when in reality, this isn't Star breaking the cycle. This is her perpetuating it. Since the founding of Muni, the butterfly family's greed and bigotry has led them to do stupid and terrible things that put the world in danger, yet history hails them as heroes. The very first queen colonizing the monster's land. Now the nation's plunged into a centuries-long conflict that kills countless. Chaskan sending Meteor to St. Olga's and replacing her? Now Muni has to deal with the hulking rage monster out to destroy everything in sight. Solaria just being the worst? Now there's a violent maniac assembling an army to commit genocide. Moon giving said maniac the means to carry out said genocide in order to stage a coup? Now all magical life has to die. And like Muni history has done countless times before, the show itself ignores the incredible harm the butterfly family's actions have done and portrays them as the heroes of this story. This even includes Solaria, the genocidal lunatic who created the Solarian warriors to begin with. Wait a second! Why don't they just ask Solaria to undo the spell? Her being the only one who can depower the Solarian warriors is the whole reason why we're doing this song and dance in the first place. And here she is, as a ghost, and apparently not evil anymore. So what gives? Are we just not gonna address that potential option for the sake of this bullshit ending? Oh my god, could this have all been avoided? God, why is this season so stupid, man? More than anything though, this is just a depressing note to end Star's character on. Star spent the entire second half of the show fighting back against the messed up system that enabled her family's corrupt actions, yet it all culminated her, willingly or not, submitting herself to that same broken system that has always ended with the butterfly family hurting innocent people. It just makes Star's journey throughout the entire show feel pointless. However, Star does at least have one reservation about destroying magic. You see, Star realizes that if she destroys magic, then it'll destroy interdimensional travel, meaning she won't ever get to see her boyfriend again, which is a far bigger concern than spreading infinite death across infinite worlds. You know, maybe I was a bit too hard on Phantom Planet. Okay, so I think we all get why having Star destroy magic is stupid and bad, but we're not done here yet. They still managed to squeeze in so much nonsense in these final 22 minutes of the show. Alright, so Star goes through with her plan to destroy all magical life, and enters the realm of magic with Marco, where they encounter Tom riding one of the unicorns that reside there, both of whom are corrupted by dark magic. Okay, this will require some explaining. Back in Mama Star, when Star and company had to travel through the realm of magic in order to get to Muni, it's revealed that dark magic has managed to spread throughout the realm and has been turning the unicorn inhabitants evil and bent on destruction, which Star and the others didn't acknowledge because the effects of the realm of magic left them in a barely lucid state. Now, when I first watched this episode, I had no clue as to where this dark magic came from, and thought that this was some sort of leftover idea for the writer's original plans for Season 4 that was never fully explained. However, they actually did set this up. Like I mentioned way earlier, in the Season 3 finale, while Star's looking for Moon in the realm of magic, we see Moon washing away the scars from using the spell with no name, leaving a trail of dark magic that infects the unicorn. Despite this very clearly setting up a future plot thread, I genuinely forgot that this ever happened due to the moment being relatively brief and subdued, as well as the show, for some reason, waiting until the 7th to last episode to follow up on this development in any way. What's even weirder is that everything with the corrupted unicorns have literally nothing to do with the plot of these final few episodes. They're apparently supposed to be a threat to the entire multiverse, but the unicorns are completely disconnected from what's going on and contribute basically nothing to the plot. It's to the point where, come the finale, the characters barely acknowledge or question their presence in any way. It's very clear that dark magic spreading through the realm of magic was originally meant to be a much bigger part of the story. However, in the final product, even with the bit of setup we got, it feels like the corrupted unicorns are just abruptly thrusted into the narrative, and regardless of the original intent, are only there to provide a convenient way to deal with Mina, and to make the audience not feel bad about the unicorns dying because they're evil now. Actually, I take that back. The unicorns do serve one other purpose here: to get Marco stabbed. Yeah, Marco accidentally gets himself stabbed by a corrupted unicorn's horn while trying to snap Tom out of his magic-induced trance, leaving him with a serious wound that he hides from Star. Now, with how much focus the wound is given here, you'd think that it's meant to indicate that Marco is dying from it, and it'd play a role in Star's decision to destroy magic, since doing so would save Marco's life and make the magical wound go away. However, because we're long past the point of Star versus having anything in the way of a coherent narrative, Marco getting stabbed is completely incidental to the finale. Star never finds out about it, so it doesn't influence her decision to destroy magic or add any drama or tension to the story, and Marco's stab wound is just unceremoniously healed up when he's sent back to Earth. What was the point of this? The really sad thing about this is that this is still way more acknowledgement than what Marcy's stabbing got in Amphibia. Now, this would normally be the part where I bemoan the horrible way that Amphibia treats Marcy, and how it's one of the main reasons why Season 3 is so mid. But my god, even Amphibia Season 3B looks like a damn masterpiece compared to the garbage I've subjected myself to. Anyways, magic is being destroyed, and Star and Marco have to go their separate ways, but the both of them go back to the dying realm of magic because they love each other so much and they can't bear to be apart, and oh dear god, I don't care about this stupid relationship. Please just stop already. Just when it seems like Star and Marco are separated for good, somehow, the power of their love was able to fuse Earth and Muni together into one world. How will this new world work when you're essentially dragging several monarchies and putting them into a democracy? Will the sun change lead to conflict between the residents of these two very different worlds? Who cares? It doesn't matter. Just ignore the chaos and panic clearly happening in the background. Ignore the mountains of broken bodies that this new world is built upon. All that matters is that Starco's canon and they're going to be together forever and ever. It's a happy ending, so long as you don't think about it at all. It's fine. Everything's fine. Good season. Great season. The 4 years of my life I've spent watching this show weren't a complete waste of my time. What are you talking about? How is this finale even worse than I remember it being? This is bad. This is really, really bad. I have never seen a television finale this utterly nonsensical. The final episode of Star vs. the Forces of Evil feels less like a coherent narrative and more like a series of things that just kind of happen for no good reason. Yet it's also weirdly underwhelming. You'd think a finale like this would be jam-packed with stuff going on, but honestly, there really isn't a whole lot that happens here. Star and her family plan to destroy magic, they succeed with limited difficulty, and then Muni and Earth combine because of reasons. The end. That's not even getting to how the show tries to dress the finale up like it's a happy ending, when this is actually a horrifying outcome for everyone outside of Star and Marco. Yeah, the monsters were saved from genocide, but if I were in their position, I'd feel a certain kind of way about how the people who participated in it are just allowed to walk free without consequence. There's also the chaos that we already see starting to arise from Earth and Muni fusing, as people from both sides are absolutely terrified and confused as to what's happening. Also, considering that Mina's still out there, and we see in her debut episode that, just like in the real world, there are plenty of people on Earth who are stupid enough to blindly follow violent, clearly unhinged bigots, as well as how people like Mina thrive during times of fear and uncertainty, which this very much is. So yeah, something tells me that the prejudice problem is only going to get worse from here. There's also definitely going to be a lot of backlash from humans on both sides of the political spectrum who will be upset either because their former leader's actions nearly led to a genocide, their current leader helped destroy magic, something that they rely on in their day-to-day lives, or both. Not to mention, as I've emphasized so many times, every magical being in the multiverse is dead. Apparently, Darren FC wanted the finale to be open-ended enough to where the story could be continued, and while I can respect and understand the reasoning behind it, I just don't think this was the right call here. There are so many troubling questions and implications that arise from this ending that would have been at least somewhat mitigated if we were given greater clarity on what the future of Earth Muni looks like through something like a montage in the credits showing this new world in a more functional state. Despite all of my complaining though, as much as Cleaved sucks as a series finale, with some tweaking, okay, a lot of tweaking, this could have worked pretty well as a cliffhanger ending, meant to lead into a fifth and final season, where all of the loose plot threads are finally resolved. The plot could have been that Toffee was somehow alive this whole time, and secretly manipulated everything from behind the scenes in order to force Star to destroy magic, with Star being completely torn up on what to do, until she sees Marco slowly dying from his magic stab wound, and in a heat of the moment decision, wipes out magic in order to save him. Yes, this is still a short-sighted decision that does even more harm than what Mina intended, but I feel like Star impulsively doing this terrible thing to save the life of the person she loved, only to immediately realize in horror what this means for the rest of the multiverse, would have made Star feel way more sympathetic. Again, this episode had all of the makings of a captivating downer ending meant to hook viewers in for a season 5. However, this isn't a downer ending, and there is no season 5. As of now, this is the definitive conclusion to Star vs. the Forces of Evil, an incoherent, underwhelming, slap-in-the-face ending that goes against all of the themes themes of the show, and without exaggeration, makes the Voltron finale look like Sozin's fucking comet. I truly cannot think of a more appropriate way for this exhaustingly awful season of television to end. With all that said, at the very least, Cleve didn't end up being the most infamous finale to a popular fantasy show that saw a severe decline in quality and premiered on Sunday, May 19th, 2019. Imagine screwing up worse than Star vs. the Force of Evil. The Aftermath. Alright people, we're in the home stretch. Just a little bit longer until I can finally escape this hell of my own creation. Anyways, believe it or not, a lot of Star vs. fans weren't very happy with Season 4. Everything from the miserable romance plotline, to the increasingly unsympathetic characters, to the myriad of unresolved plot threads, led Star vs. Season 4 to be critically lambasted. The finale was especially infamous for how bizarre and unintentionally horrifying it was, to the point where many thought that the ending alone completely ruined the show in its entirety. Now despite, or possibly because of the controversy surrounding this season, initially, there were quite a few people interested in seeing Star vs. come back in some capacity, with petitions quickly being made for Disney to either greenlight a Season 5 or a full-on movie. At first, it seemed like the controversy surrounding Season 4 wouldn't be enough to kill the fanbase. However, over time, discussion of Season 4's poor quality would start to overshadow every other aspect of the show. Videos and posts criticizing Star vs. and its finale would gradually overtake the ones praising it. Definitely not helping matters is that not too long after its conclusion, Disney Channel would start airing Amphibia, and later, The Owl House, two other coming-of-age fantasy cartoons with an ongoing narrative centering on a teenage girl who ends up in another world, and both of which would end up stealing Star vs. the Force of Evil's thunder by doing a lot of what that show tried to do, without falling into the same storytelling and tonal pitfalls that ended up hurting it. And also, unlike Star vs., these shows actually had finales that people liked. The combination of Amphibia and the Owl House's popularity, as well as Season 4's poor quality, would lead many to start reevaluating Star vs. in its entirety, and begin to notice more of its faults, with some even going as far as to question whether it was ever all that good to begin with. Come present day, the entire conversation surrounding Star vs. the Force of Evil has been completely flipped on its head. Despite how wildly popular the show was while it was airing, with some clips officially uploaded by Disney exceeding well over 10 million views, now in these days, Star vs. is a complete laughingstock. While similar Disney Channel shows continue to be celebrated years after their conclusion, not many people really seem to want to talk about Star vs. unless it's about how obnoxious the romance got, or the fact that it ends with Star literally committing magic genocide. At best, it's now seen as a show that started out really fun, but went completely off the rails when it became all about romance and melodrama. At worst, Star vs. is considered to be a completely overhyped show, the pinnacle of how not to handle an ongoing narrative in a cartoon, and rivals the likes of Fairly Odd Parents as one of the worst instances of seasonal rot in a children's animated series. I once said that what happened with Voltron Legendary Defender was the worst possible outcome for a show that went through seasonal rot. Upon reflection, I was completely wrong. At least some people still speak positively about Voltron. At least not every single discussion surrounding it revolves around its controversies. At least its bad final season doesn't get compared to the tail end of fucking Fairly Odd Parents. No, this right here is the absolute worst outcome for a show that goes through seasonal rot. Since the show's conclusion in 2019, in contrast to the likes of Gravity Falls and Amphibia, Star vs. never received any further tie-in material that continued its story, which again is wild considering how massive it once was. While Darren Nefsey is still interested in returning to the world of Star vs., as of now, Disney doesn't seem to have any plans for the show. Now granted, given the animation industry's current obsession with bringing everything back, as well as there still being demand for more Star vs, despite its now polarizing reputation, it's possible that we might see Star again sometime in the future. I have no idea how they'd go about addressing the whole magical genocide thing, as well as tying up the mountains of loose ends, but I genuinely wish the best of luck to Nefsey. Even if putting together this video kind of makes me never want to think about Star vs. ever again. With all that said, the show would see representation in Disney Channel's crossover series, Chibiverse, where its Valentine's Day episode would see Eden Scher and Adam MacArthur reprising their roles as Star and Marco for the first time in 5 years, which was overshadowed by the Lumini rep in that same episode, and a resurgence of jokes made at Starco's expense. That said, appearing in Chibiverse isn't really that much of an achievement. I mean, they let in the likes of Billy from Billy Dilly's Super Duper Subterranean Adventure. It's not exactly an exclusive club. Beyond that though, the Star vs. property has still remained dormant. As for Darren Nefsey, while she and several other Star vs. crew members were at one point developing a show for Nickelodeon, that project seems to have long since been scrapped, as she's no longer associated with Nick. Other than that, Nefsey went on to direct an episode of the limited animated series We the People, and seems to have another project in the works. Final thoughts. I'm gonna be honest with y'all, returning to Star vs. the Forces of Evil wasn't fun. It was painful watching this genuinely fun, creative show gradually devolve into this needlessly complicated, miserable mess. I really thought that after 6 years, I would be emotionally prepared for how terrible Star vs. Season 4 was. But holy crap, by the time I was done, I was left a sad, broken shell of a man. Granted, that's more or less my perpetual state of being now in these days, but Season 4 did nothing to improve on that. There was so much potential here, so many ways that Season 4 could have been salvaged, but the show just ended up focusing on all the wrong things, resulting in an incoherent mess of a final episode that cemented this season as one of my least favorite television viewing experiences ever. Quite literally, the only things I got out of this rewatch was maybe a bit more appreciation for characters like Tom and Jackie, and validation that the final season of Star vs. the Force of Evil was indeed every bit as horrible as I joked about it being for so long. I need you all to understand that, for me at least, this isn't simply a case where a show I loved went downhill. Unlike nearly every show I've watched that saw a decline in quality, Star vs. Season 4 actively undoes all of the good that came before it. With something like, say, Fairly Odd Parents, you can easily ignore its awful later seasons due to how largely episodic it was. Star vs., on the other hand, wasn't this episodic, silly comedy cartoon where the story doesn't matter all that much. Star vs., at least from Season 2 onwards, was a fully serialized, lore-driven show that had an ongoing story that kept audiences gripped for 4 years. And because the end of each season directly led into the start of the next, there's no feasible stopping point where you can just pretend the show ended. No matter how you look at it, Season 4 is the definitive end of Star vs. the Forces of Evil, and if you screw up the final season of a big, ambitious narrative like this one, people are gonna get a lot more mad than they would over a Butch Hartman cartoon. All of this makes Season 4 even more infuriating than it already is. Season 4's stank is so bad that it actively makes revisiting the show beyond draining. Despite Season 1 still holding up, and Seasons 2 and 3 at the very least being competent, the fact that I went in knowing that all of these characters, plot threads, and dynamics I was being reintroduced to would either get derailed or straight up abandoned, made revisiting this show genuinely miserable in a way that I don't think I've ever felt with a piece of media before. This show's final season is that very rare case where a story's destination completely invalidates the journey getting there. It's to the point where Season 4 makes me genuinely regret ever getting emotionally invested in Star vs. the Force of Evil. Now that leads into one simple question. Why? Why on earth did the final season of Star vs. the Force of Evil end up this bad? There's no way that it's solely because of Giancarlo Volpe leaving the show, especially when Season 3, the first season that he was largely absent for, while deeply flawed, was at least serviceable. Now given the open-endedness of the finale, as well as Darren Nefsey being vocal about wanting Star vs. to return not long after it wrapped up, it's widely believed that she planned for the show to run for a then unprecedented for a Disney Channel series 5 seasons, which would perfectly explain how clunky and rushed Season 4 feels. However, if I'm being real, given how the storytelling problems in Star vs. were starting to become apparent as early as Season 2, I'm not sure how much having a 5-season run from the get-go will fix the core issues with Season 4, and by extension, the show in its entirety. Granted, we'd probably get a better villain than Mina Loveberry, and the story would have definitely felt better paced, but I'm not sure if this would have remedied problems like the obnoxious romance, clumsy handling of its prejudice plotline, and miserable tone. Plus, for all we know, the destruction of magic and making Star into an actual mass murderer still would have been the show's endgame. That said, none of us will ever truly know how much a 5th season would have changed things. As for me personally, I think what really led Star vs. the Force of Evil to fall apart was that it got way too ambitious for its own good, while completely forgetting just what made it special to begin with. As the show progressed, it wanted to tackle more serious topics, follow more characters and subplots, have its story expand to an even wider scope, but the show ultimately bit off more than it could chew. Star vs. promised so much and felt like it was building up to something amazing, but when Season 4 was burdened with providing the audience with the payoff it was expecting, the series wound up crumbling under the weight of its own ambitions, and ended up delivering a disjointed mess of a final season that didn't make anyone happy. Now I could be wrong about this, but seeing how wildly different the first half of the show is from the second half makes me truly suspect that Star vs. wasn't originally intended to become as serious and heavily serialized as it ended up getting. The way that Star vs. becomes a darker, more serialized story feels less like a natural progression like it was in something like Adventure Time, and more like it was trying to be something that it simply wasn't. Like if the Ghost and Molly McGee decided in its second season that it wanted to be the Owl House. It generally comes across like the writers decided to change course from the original vision of the show starting with season 3 by putting far greater emphasis on drama and romance for no other reason than that's what they thought the fan base wanted. And to be fair, that was what we wanted. Keep in mind, Star vs. aired during the peak of serialization in cartoons, and at a point where people were needlessly critical of purely silly, goofy shows for not being serious enough or lacking some sort of balance between serious and silly. I just don't think that any of us anticipated that Star vs. would get so serious and so melodramatic that it would stop being fun to watch. In hindsight though, Star vs. didn't really need to get more serious, or have greater serialization, or create this big ambitious narrative like Steven Universe or Gravity Falls did. All it really needed to do was be fun, something that it once really excelled at. Now Star vs. kept the mostly lighthearted, episodic tone of its first season. Would its popularity have ever reached the peaks that it did? Honestly, I'm not sure. Again, we all ate serialization up back then. However, I can at least say that if it did stick to the tone of season 1, then Star vs. the Force of Evil would have never gained the notorious reputation that it has today. After all, we've seen with critically acclaimed shows like Wonder Over Yonder, The Ghost and Molly McGee, and Moon Girl and Devil's Dinosaur, that it's more than possible for a show with an ongoing narrative to be straightforward and lighthearted fun while still telling stories that leave a strong emotional impact on its viewers. Ultimately, Star vs. the Force of Evil was a show that became so thoroughly blinded by its ambitions, so fixated on being more serious, that it lost the wild sense of fun that made it so enjoyable to watch in the first place. And now we're left with a series forever sullied by a final season so miserable, so incoherent, so utterly disastrous, that's still getting dunked on more than 6 years later. As fun as it may be to rag on, it really is tragic to see just how far Star vs. ended up falling. The writers clearly wanted to make something great, and tried their best to create some sort of coherent conclusion to the show that was clearly going off the rails, but they just couldn't pull it off in the end. I'll give Star vs. Season 4 this though, it's definitely something that I'm not gonna forget anytime soon. No matter how hard I try. And with that, it's over. It's finally over! After all of this time, after having this script rattling in my head for so long, I finally covered the final season of Star vs. the Force of Evil. And now that I've said quite literally all I could ever say about it, I think that it's time for the running gag of me ragging on Star vs. to come to an end. After this monster of a video, beyond the few reaction images from it that I use, I think that I'm perfectly content to never think about or reference Star vs. again. I mean, unless the show comes back and this video does super well. In that case, I'd be fully willing to sell out my integrity and do a follow-up on Star vs. Otherwise, I'm finally ready to move on and put Star vs. the Force of Evil behind me. Who knows, maybe someday I'll find a new piece of media that'll give me enough hatred to fill the hole in my frigid, hollow heart. So what did you think about Season 4 of Star vs. the Force of Evil? Did it ruin your life like it did mine? Or do you think the hate for it is overblown? If it's the latter, I need you to know how badly I envy you. Feel free to discuss in the comments below if you like. Maybe even consider subscribing if you want to hear more of me rambling about literally anything other than Star vs. the Force of Evil for hopefully a more reasonable amount of time. Thank you all so much for allowing me to reach 1,000 subscribers. The support means a lot to me, and I hope to continue making videos until the day I give up and finally become a productive member of society. Until that day comes, I'm gonna go marry my bed. Here's hoping that the intense exhaustion I'm feeling now won't kill me. Seriously though, if you're ever considering making a multi-hour video on a piece of media that you hate, f***ing don't. It will take years off your life, and it won't be worth it. Anyways, good night everybody. I'll remember you all in therapy.